What is hip hop and happening, gamers? Welcome back to the SuperShow Podcast, episode number 167, coming at you not quite live this time from the blind spot of the games industry, the hangover week of the games industry, as everyone has collectively left LA and stopped producing any newsworthy announcements or headlines or anything for us to talk about, but we're going to try anyway. And when I say we, I'm talking about not just myself, but also my good friend, Mr. Alex Jones. Good evening, sir. How are you?
I am very well, thank you, mate. Yes, this is going to be a bit of a dry one on the news front, but we've got some stories, we've got some stuff to chat about, so everything should be all good. And mate, I'm just happy to be here chatting about video games with you. What can I say?
Yeah, you know what? We don't do this often enough. It's almost like we should sit down every week and watch every video game live stream and break down every single announcement from the summer game. Oh, wait, we did all of that and it's already out there in the public. You can go to our YouTube channel and watch whatever you'd like. That means, as I said, you can recap our watch-alongs of certain live streams. We watched the Ubisoft Forward. Did we watch the... I'm forgetting what we watched live and what we didn't. Did we watch Ubisoft?
No, we didn't. We watched Summer Game Fest, we watched Xbox, and that was it.
Oh yeah, I guess there was that PlayStation showcase the week before that kind of...
We summed up though. Yeah. Last week's podcast, we also summed up the Ubisoft Forward, and we did a super fast sum up of Capcom as well. You did for us right at the very end.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you want to know everything, our thoughts on everything from Starfield to, I don't know, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, it's all out there. Like I said, YouTube is the place to go, at SuperShow Pod. There are podcasts, there are live stream catch-ups and watch-alongs. Everything's available there. And if you want to consume all that stuff in audio form, you can head over to major podcasting platforms like Spotify, like iTunes, like Google Podcasts. You can find it all over there too. And as a last resort, if you're just really allergic to anything new wave, anything high-end, anything digital, well, this is still kind of digital, but it's analog digital. It's Paisley Radio over at paisleyradio.com. And the reason I say it's analog digital is because it's broadcast out at Thursdays at 10 p.m. If you miss that, you can catch it on Mondays. If you miss that, you can't catch it again. It's gone. Okay, that's the way radio, well, unless you go to the YouTube channel, I guess, in which case that stuff lives forever, Jonesy.
It does. You think you can get rid of it. You think that your brief stint on OnlyFans will be gone after you decided that actually you want to be a primary school teacher. But no, it's out there forever for everyone to see.
Yeah.
You get wanked off by a man in a hazmat suit. I don't know.
Is that what you think you'd go for? Would that be your niche on OnlyFans?
Yeah. Radiation hazmat suit.
Interesting. I thought you'd be a foot guy because a little peek behind the curtain here. Jonesy used to own, or probably does still own, a pair of shoes.
I thought you were going to say feet. Jonesy used to own feet. Jonesy still has feet.
Yeah, he's very well known for his feet. And these shoes had individual things for each toe. So you would plug, I don't know what to use other than plug, but you would plug each toe into its socket and wear these weird, like, something like a Guillermo del Toro alien would have feet like these. It was disgusting.
No, it was.
And you want them to work.
That was just for you and Chris. I knew you'd love it.
Well, yeah.
They were called Vibram Five Fingers, and they were that whole barefoot running craze thing. Because do you know what? I started to run like sometimes to work from the station, and it's like I think it was just over a mile, and I'd run like to work, and I'd run home. And I was like, you don't want to wear like running trainers all day or whatever. And then I got these Vibram Five Fingers because the idea is you can't run on your heel, like you can't heel strike because it fucking hurts. So you run on your toes and you run like there's probably 18 books about it. It's like how humans were supposed to run back in the savannah. You're supposed to like run on your toes. So I got them and I wore them a couple of times, and they are comfortable, but they do hurt your calf muscles because you're not used to walking on your toes at the time.
Yeah. I'm impressed that they're comfortable at all. I do think they need a little bit of rebranding work because Vibram Five Fingers sounds like something that a writer at Blizzard would come up with and get rejected for like a rare item in World of Warcraft. They were like, no one's going to wear Vibram Five Fingers. No one's going to do a raiding in the Five Fingers.
It is also weird now you say it because obviously it's toes. It'd be like making a pair of gloves that are called like warm toes and they're for your hands.
Well, I think that's what people found so disconcerting about the footwear of choice for you in those hot summer months was that there's something about like making each toe so individual.
Each piggy's got his own home.
They shouldn't stand out that much. They should be like, there should be some ubiquity to the way people's toes are presented in public. But then I'm a freak about that stuff anyway, because I don't even like, or for that matter, own flip-flops, sandals, anything of that nature. Even these slide-ons, that are very popular nowadays, don't own anything like it. Don't like seeing them. Don't wear them on public transport. If I see exposed toes on a public transport like the tube or the bus, I should reserve the right to strike you.
On the toes, you stamp. And I can't stamp on the toes.
I think a place of my choice.
I actually bought some sliders like 2 weeks ago because
Of course you did.
all my flip-flops have all died from last summer, so I was like, I need to get some more, and I couldn't find flip-flops, and all I could find was sliders. So I thought, okay, I'm going to rock some sliders, and they're quite nice. I like them. I think they're quite comfortable. I don't wear them with socks. That's a very strange thing. I find that really weird.
Yeah,
I'm not a road man, so I'm not rocking some Adidas sliders and white socks. That's just strange.
You and me both, Jonesy. We have that in common. Our roadman qualities and tendencies not quite up to par. We're just regular men of this earth, would you say?
We're just what's the meme video?
We're just normal men, innocent men.
Just innocent men.
We're just innocent men. Innocent men who are not so much scraping the barrel of video game news this week, so much as we're scraping the toilet of video game news. But we do get to start things off this week with one of our favorites on the podcast. Like, if ever there were sort of like, I mean, Chris will always be our sort of like not quite third member, but if ever there were like a fourth member of the Super Show, I'd like to think it would be Mr. Hideo Kojima. It would be Kojima-san, who doesn't know us, doesn't know we exist. We've never interacted or interfaced with him in any way, and yet he feels like family in a weird way.
We've talked about him at such length over so many years. I completely agree. He is the... there's a few people out there that are going to take umbrage to this, namely people that have been on the podcast multiple times. But no, he's the fourth member of the pod is Kojima-san. I would love to do is sporadically do interviews in this format where we connect with people over the internet, and if we could interview Hideo Kojima and his translator, let's be honest, to add to a little section for our pod, that'd be amazing. I'd love to just start.
I think we'd probably have to pay Jeff Keighley's fee as well. I think, like, by law, he has to be present for every English language thing Kojima does. And for as much as you're right to point out, the likes of Steph and Sam and Martin and all the friendly faces that have helped, fill the rotating seat in this podcast over the years. You've got a mortgage to pay. I've got rent to pay. We've got a Patreon to plug. If it came down to it, and it was who's up for the hot seat, and it was Steph Murphy versus Hideo Kojima, well, one of those pays the bills slightly easier than the other. And I don't know. Let me put it this way: when it comes to our kinship with Hideo Kojima, he's one of the only game developers on planet Earth I genuinely think that you could introduce to the five fingers, and he would start wearing them.
He'd put him in the next game. There'd be something you'd get. They'd be in Death Stranding. There'd be something you'd get in Death Stranding, and it would make sense. It would actually be the only way those shoes actually make sense.
Yeah. There is a lot of feet stuff already in Death Stranding that kind of fits. The way he kind of wiggles his toes when you zoom the camera in on his feet.
Yeah.
And he has to upgrade his shoes, and he has that one cut scene where he peels his toenail off and in the shower. Gross feet stuff and Hideo Kojima go hand in hand. So do, apparently, Jonesy, in the potential future, extraterrestrial travel. That's according to a recent round of interviews that Kojima did while he was speaking at the premiere of a new documentary, Connecting Worlds, that is actually all about him. Very strange experience if anyone wants to head over to YouTube and watch the trailer for that one. I love Hideo Kojima. I like his games very a lot, but that is one of the most masturbatorial exercises in documentary filmmaking I've ever seen. I think at one point they describe him as the first ever auteur in video games. I was like, it's a little bit much.
Yeah, that's a bit weird.
Yeah. But the good news for us as podcasters is that it meant that he was put in front of cameras and microphones, which meant that he was given a platform to say batshit crazy stuff, which he did do when he was being interviewed, as I said, in connection with this documentary. He was asked what he wanted to do in the future Any so a quick question, Josie, actually, no prizes involved, but any guesses as to who might have asked Hideo Kojima this question? If one English-speaking white man were present to have asked Hideo Kojima a question, who might it have been?
It's probably going to be Kef Geely.
The shiny shoes himself, Kef Geely, was on the scene. And in response to this question about what he wanted to do in the future, Kojima said, "I want to go to outer space. I want to go to outer space and create a game you can play in space. ... So please, someone send me up to space." Which
Shout out Bezos, send me to space.
That's a beautiful addendum of realizing, hey, I'm still in America. There are probably some crazy rich people in the audience. Like, I shouldn't just pitch this idea. I should also pitch the fact that I need to go to space for it.
Do you know what? Okay, one thing that immediately comes to mind though when you say that, because then what we're saying about like, oh, Jeff Bezos could send him to space. He's got his own company that do that. Obviously, Elon could as well. But there was a clip, and if you haven't seen it, go out there and watch it. And it's where William Shatner was sent to space, and he went with Jeff Bezos. And then they come back down, they land, and Jeff says something to William Shatner like, "What did you think?" And William Shatner has this kind of profound moment where he says, like, "What I looked out into the inky black void of space, and there was nothing there. And we're so obsessed with this vast emptiness. And I turned around and looked upon the earth in all its glory and realized that how everything we've ever known, all life exists there, and every story that's ever happened is there, and how amazing earth itself is." And then he like looks back at Jeff Bezos, and Jeff Bezos goes something like, "What a fucking ride." You just like, if at that point I could have put someone next to William Shatner, I think Kojima-san would have been the perfect person. He would have gone even more in depth about craziness and stories and what you could do with that, like, you know, experiencing that. He'd probably come out of some crazy shit if he went to space. He'd suddenly come out of a whole new... It wouldn't be about walking, Jamie. It would be a walking simulator. It would be a space simulator.
A spacewalking simulator.
Spacewalking simulator.
Yep. You attach a tether, you attach a strand to a space station and go spacewalking off in the distance. I would look forward to all the really, no doubt, interesting and very post-modern ways that Hideo Kojima would interpret some of these ideas. Like, I can envision a point at which Sam Porter Bridges, presuming he's still the protagonist, comes across a strange, out-of-place black hole in the ground, and Kojima then steps in and say, the black hole represents a black void that one would feel when one visits space. If you can pick up what he's putting down, you know, you'll understand. But it's advanced. You know, this is high level allegory and metaphor. I understand.
I would love it if it turned out in years to come that Hideo Kojima has no idea when it comes to like writing stories, video games, anything like that. And actually, he is, I don't know what the equivalent word would be. He's like a beard, and the translator is the real genius. And so whenever someone asks a question, the translator is the one who sort of gives the answers. And Kojima's there just thinking he's having a chat about biscuits or something. He's a chef. He doesn't know anything about video games.
That would be pretty spectacular. You do sometimes wonder if the lines get blurred when, especially, there are some, you know, increasingly massive and lengthy Japanese titles that get brought over to the West every year now. The localization teams that work at places like Capcom and Sega, like, because one thing we learn and we know about language, the more conversations we have, is that sometimes it's really difficult to translate things one to one, and there are sayings or idioms that just don't translate at all or that wouldn't make sense. It must be fascinating, A, working in video game localization, and B, being the secret genius behind all of Kojima's work. It's like that weird theory that like Shakespeare just stole all of his shit. Like Shakespeare was a fucking couldn't do shit, and everyone around him was really smart.
It's funny because we've got around to this because, of course, we were debating whether on we weren't going to put it in, but there was a story about Street Fighter 6 whereby they have created a character that you can fight in the game who is purely in existence because of a mistranslation. Because Ryu says, "You will not be able to take on my I can't remember the name of it is my Shoryuken, my Dragon Punch," but it was translated just Sheng Long, and then everyone's like, "Who's this Sheng Long boss?" And it's not a boss; it was just a mistranslation. But yeah, it is weird when you think about, because you'd think that it wouldn't be that hard to localize stuff and to get a local equivalent, but apparently they just absolutely butcher it. half the time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's come on a long way lately. Like, certainly there are some very infamous, as you said, like not just stories, but also memes that have resulted from very poor translation work that existed. And like weird things about how certain, like Street Fighter is another example, how they have to shift around all the names all the time. And like there are different names for people in Japan compared to the US because like due to various problems, whether it's likeness issues or copyright issues or things being more appropriate for each audience. Something that Kojima wouldn't really have to worry about too much when it comes to space because it's kind of nomad. It's like the same as being in international waters. As the film Step Brothers reminded us, if you were to eat another man's penis in international waters, no one could do anything about it. Like you can't be prosecuted. It's true.
Does the moon thing hold? Because America obviously put a flag in the moon, and Eddie Izzard taught us that that's how you claim somewhere is you stick a flag in it and then it's yours, even if other people are there already. So the gap between Earth and the moon is no man's land. You can eat a penis and it's fine.
Yep.
On the moon, if you eat another man's penis, are you subject to American law?
Good question.
It's one for Joe Biden.
I was going to say one for Hideo Kojima. I think he'd have some really profound thoughts on that. Speaking of which, I'm gonna get you to play the job of Jeff Keighley and clarify something that Kojima said that isn't helped by the way it's written down. When he says he wants to create a game where you can play in space, do you think he's referring to a game that allows the player to control a character who exists in space? Maybe like floating in zero gravity, or do you think it's literally this is a video game that you go to outer space to play?
If I know Hideo Kojima, and I think I do, he is talking about a game that in space you can play it.
Right. Wow. I mean, again, that kind of brings back around the kind of the Jeff Bezos link. It's not impossible to see a world where one of those crazy billionaires, like, is Richard Branson still doing his stuff?
I think because that was what was it, Virgin Galaxy? Was it Galaxy? Virgin Galactic.
You'd know better than me.
I think it's Virgin Galactic. I believe that has now closed down. But I think he's still going, but Virgin is still going. But I think Virgin Galactic is closed down, I believe.
Yeah.
I should check.
I could see, so basically what I'm saying is I could see some billionaire linking up with Kojima and saying, hey, could you design an experience that is like in some way a video game that enhances the like what it's like to be in outer space or to visit outer space or whatever terminology you're meant to use for that shit. And it becomes a weird part of those sort of programs they're running, like the one that you mentioned that Shatner went on. But that seems like the biggest of stretches. And I think even Kojima, in the context of this quote, wasn't imagining that as how the story ended. Yeah.
Do you know what? I could not have been more wrong in what I just said as well. Let me completely denounce and reject my own previous comments, because Virgin Galactic is within weeks. We're talking the end of June, 27th of June to the 30th of June, has its eyes on its very first commercial space flight. Wow. Which is going to hopefully kick off like proper space tourism. So not just these, billionaires taking some mates up with them. It's actually going to be a something that you can do yourself, and it'll only cost you $450,000 per person. So, I mean, sell your house and a couple of kids, and you might be able to go.
I'm not sure how that would go down with your wife, but I think it's worth a shot, right? Like once in a lifetime opportunity. Everyone gets a chance. Well, most people get a chance at home ownership at one point in their life. How many people get to go to space, Jamesy?
I would love to go to space as well. The problem is, realistically, in one of these little space flights, you're probably going to go, it's not going to be proper space flight, is it? It's going to be pop up, skim the atmosphere, do a bit of a parabola so you can get a bit of zero G, and you're going to come back down. And you're going to be up there for like 5 minutes and go, wasn't that amazing? And you'll be like, if you're a billionaire, it wasn't amazing. Yeah, 450 grand, probably don't give a shit. You can make that in about 3.5 days. So you're like, that's fine. Exactly. If you're someone who sold their house to experience that, I imagine it doesn't hit quite the same. You're like, oh, it was good, but I'm now destitute.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree. And but that being said, when you outline a future for space travel like that, I can totally see a world in which Hideo Kojima does visit outer space at some point in the future. how that impacts his future game creations remains to be seen. But one thing you and I were talking about before we started recording is that he is, whether in practice or in theory, no stranger to what might be considered radical game design ideas. We talked about Boktai, the GBA game that had a light sensor on the actual cartridge and had functions within the game to basically, that would vary depending on how much sunlight that sensor was exposed to. We also talked about a quote from some time ago where he pitched this idea of a video game that would somehow self-destruct if the player should die. This idea that, one might actually be buying a full-on retail product, that if you die once in the game, essentially your journey is over at that point, which would be very hard to price, I'd say, if I were thinking in sort of marketing and marketing terms.
It's got to be expensive. Yes, because imagine if it was like 50p, then you completely remove the stakes, because especially if it's free, you could just like create a new account and go back in. It needs to be like 50 quid, so you've got some skin in the game.
Okay, I mean that would be fast. It would be one of the lowest selling games of his career, but it would be one of the most fascinating.
Oh, I tell you what, would be absolutely amazing about that would be that you effectively becomes the game that, as a streamer, especially if you're good, let's say for example it was a battle royale game, but there was but it was a persistent battle royale universe where everyone gets one shot, right? But if you're a streamer and you think you're, the best streamer or whatever, you think you're really good at first-person shooters, put your money where your mouth is, because you've got one shot at surviving in this game. And you go on and you stream it and you're like, I'm going to stream it, I'm going to do it. And then you get in the game and it's like, that would be pretty cool to see people actually.
Yeah.
Because you'd have one go at trying to maintain. You'd have to have some sort of way by you could remove yourself from the environment and save in between streams, obviously. But that'd be cool.
It would be very interesting. And you're right to mention streaming, because that would absolutely be a spectator sport. Like, you could sit like someone who'd been on like the craziest run, depending on how the game was designed and but someone who'd be like, yeah, they're 250 hours in and they still haven't died. Like, that would become the hot topic and everyone would start watching them. It would be like, how's this going to end? You get so many interesting stories that we come out of that, depending again on sort of the nature of the game or its genre. But yeah, it will be interesting to see. And it's the reason why I'm excited that whilst we know he is, of course, developing Death Stranding 2 or DS2, and we saw a trailer for that last year, we know he's also working on some very ambiguous project with Microsoft that appears to make use of some of their cloud-based technology. I think that might have also been the same game that Google at one point passed on when they were kind of in the midst of figuring out what the future of Stadia looked like. So a world, and it seems like it's the one in which we inhabit, where Hideo Kojima is kind of making a safe game and a dangerous game simultaneously, and always tactically using other people's money while he does it, is an exciting one to me. So, any elevator pitches that you would, and let's say literal elevators. You've just arrived, you've just touched base in, let's say, LA this December for the Game Awards. You're a personal guest of Mr. Kev Geely. In fact, no, you're not even a personal guest. He ordered a specific pair of sparkly shoes from London. You've been entrusted to bring them to him personally.
Ones that you can plug your toes into each individual little piggy hole.
Exactly. These are the Vetron 600s or whatever. I can't even remember the name of the fucking shoes. 600 fingers. And you've just got into an elevator. You're going up to Jeff Keighley's private penthouse suite to hand over his shoes. Kojima steps in, says, I've listened to your podcast. What do you think I should do for my next video game?
Oh, that's...
You've got the rest of that elevator ride. So Kojima.
Does this need to be a game here? Does this need to be a game that you can play in space?
No, they could tap into the space element, could not tap into the space element. This could be a fully fleshed out idea or just a strand of an idea. A component or an idea or an element or a trend or anything that you would be curious to see one of the more interesting minds in gaming sort of tap into. Even if it's just like, I want to see what Hideo Kojima comes up with if he's forced to make a sports game. Like, I want to see what Hideo Kojima's Baseball 2024 looks like, because it'd be fascinating to see what his mind does with those parameters, you know?
So no, actually, you know, my mind kind of went to the same place, but in a different genre. I would love to see his take on and I don't mean from the subject matters specifically, but I mean like kind of how the game works. I would love to see Hideo Kojima's take on something like Life is Strange.
So very narrative driven.
Exactly, like very narrative driven, but also put some sort of make him aim it at like maybe slightly a younger audience, a different crowd, so he can't just fall back into the same kind of you know, things that he does, the story areas that he falls into these days. Like to see him actually be pushed in that direction where it's got to be maybe like it's based around a school, it's teenagers to start with, and then you kind of go from there and you go out and you say, Hideo, tell your story. But yeah, narrative. We're not talking stealth. We're not talking killing anyone, and then go Hideo.
It would be fascinating because there's so much that's said, you know, when it comes to his work on the Metal Gear series, and of course, most recently with Death Stranding. So much conversation about the narrative chops of those games versus the gameplay chops, and how much would each one stand on their own if the other was removed. Kojima making like an almost gameplayless, like a walking simulator-esque story-driven game, that would really see his writing laid bare in a way that I think would be excruciating for some people and fascinating for others.
I think he'd love it. Like he obviously, you know, with his cutscenes and stuff, he gets hours and hours and hours of exposition and things into his games anyway. And he always has these overarching like big narratives, and he likes to follow these, you know, strands and really get into sort of almost philosophy and things like that. But just to direct it and to put it into something like, I think he'd absolutely love it. If he didn't have to then go, and now you fight. If it could just be, no, man, do whatever you want. They're just going to walk to the next scene, to the next interaction. You can go crazy.
Yeah. Wow. Like I said, I'd be fascinated to see what the outcome of that experiment would be for some of the right and a lot of the wrong reasons. Fair. I just want to say, for what it's worth, that I think would be really interesting. I think one of the things that Kojima's teams over the years have done really well, especially in MGS5 and Death Stranding, is creating these really interesting gameplay loops where you're constantly upgrading your kind of the things you have around you, the tools with which you complete your missions or go about your tasks, and in such a way that makes life easier. And the game is constantly ramping up the difficulty or the circumstances of the environment with which you have to do those tasks to counteract how much life is getting easier. Like Death Stranding is the easiest example. It's like just when you get to the point where you're like, I've got level 3 shoes and an exoskeleton and I can carry 17 bucks at the same time. He's like, yeah, now go and do it at like the peaks of the snowiest mountains in the world. And you're like, yeah, no, okay, I see what you mean. And so I would like to see some of those loops applied to the wonderful world of clickers. I want to see Hideo Kojima's cookie clicker too.
That would be interesting. Yeah, to see what he did with the clicker would be quite fun.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd think of some very interesting descriptions for the purchasables that bring those lovable upgrades. And speaking of purchasables, listen, folks, it's 2023, and what you do with your money has never been more important. People are experiencing cost of living crises all over the world, and you are staring and or listening to two of them. Which is why I come to you today. I'm not actually going to beg, which is why I come to you today to make you aware, should you not be aware already, that we are in fact on Patreon over at patreon.com/SuperShow. That's the link that you can head over to check out everything we've got going on over there. You can check out the various tiers at which people have chosen to support us at, and we can check out the various rewards that we give those people in return. It's pretty flexible. $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. You can find a spot that you feel comfortable, or that you think and in fact, I was about to say, or that you think we've earned, but I'm not actually going to invite that kind of sentiment because I read there are some comments out there. But, you know, whether it's Discord access so you can chat to us or ask us questions and be informed whenever we're about to go live, because we're still getting better at telling people when that shit's going to happen, or whether it's Patreon exclusive videos that we filmed going back years at this point, it's all there, patreon.com/SuperShow. And as such, I would like to, first of all, there are some names on screen right now, hopefully. Jonesy, give me a nod. There's the nod. There are some names on screen right now. So shout out to all of those legends. But I'd also like to give a special shout out to the likes of Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Cole K, Ice Not Rock Salt, Jesper Camdal Nielsen, Leo Merger, Mindful Pig, Mr. Anthropic, Pastors Guild, Brett Z. Oh, excuse me, I jumped. There was a page break at the same point as a jump in the list as we move from the legends that I just mentioned to another group of legends, the members of the board, the ones that really get our dicks. I don't know. I went into full and Chris mode there for a second, didn't I? Get our dicks hard. Shout outs to Brett Z, aka Shell Shock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Book Read, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad, aka the Big Dogs. But whether you are on screen or whether your name was said aloud or whether you have pledged to us at any point in the past, we thank you all so much. It is your continued and ongoing support that is the reason that we are still here doing whatever the fuck this is for whoever the fuck is watching and or listening. Yes, we get a kick out of it. I'd like to think we still, for the most part, enjoy each other's company. I enjoy Jonesy's. I can't speak for the other way around. But you guys are the reason that the lights are still on and that this podcast is still a thing, I guess is the best way to describe it, right, Jonesy?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's still surprising there are people that support us week in and week out. But we are very, very grateful, and that is exactly the reason why we've been coming back for damn near 3 years, which is kind of crazy to just say that. But yeah, over 3 years. Oh God, of course. I do this every time. I lose a year. No, it is. It's over 3 years.
Sure.
Jesus, we 3.5 years now.
Listen, you're listening to a pre-pandemic podcast. I don't know why I turned that into a producer tag, but it just felt like it. It felt right.
It did. Well, when we're like 40, you're in your 40s and I'm in my 50s, and we're still doing this, and we'll be like, thank you for coming back for 30 years and listening to our podcast. We're pre-pandemic. People will be like, who are these old bastards? What are they talking
A grey-haired Jeff Keighley has just wheeled himself onto the stage at Summer Game Fest 2037.
Wheeled out a 120-year-old celebrity to talk about video games, and they have no idea.
Yep. People are wondering whether or not Tears of the Kingdom will go on sale for the very first time. These and many other gaming milestones that we'll be embracing as we enter the next chapter of our lives. But as we're still in the current chapter of our lives, Jonesy, how about you let the good folks at home and myself know what you've been up to lately?
Do you know what? I finally did it. Okay. I thought this is the month. I decided that it was time to hop on board and pick up Jedi Survivor. So I finally got my hands on that.
I finally did it. And this is the month. The only other month you could have done it other than this was April or May.
Those are 2 other months. I finally did it.
I finally did it.
It's a long time. It feels like it's been a long, long time. I've been resisting. I
mean, a lot has happened in that time. You're right. I take it back.
And I was really sort of like hankering for some more Jedi. And I jumped in and I've had it, and I feel like I'm right. So like we said with God of War, this really does feel like a continuation of the previous game. It picks up right where, well, not right where, it's a bit of time's passed, but it feels like it picks up right where the previous game left off. There's no kind of craziness to sort of changing in the way the game works or the story works. There's obviously some new things happening and new environments, but it feels very familiar, which I'm appreciating. Yeah. There's still a little bit of I can't think of a good word for it, but there's a little bit of the platforming misfires, I suppose is what I'm going to say.
Were you tempted to say the word jank?
I think no. No, maybe jank doesn't feel right, because I think with platformers, it's a foregone conclusion, right? When you're trying to design a level and you're trying to get people to interact in a certain way, I feel like jank is not the right word for in platformers where you kind of go, do I go over there? And it's because it's more like a miscommunication between the level designer and the player. And I feel like it's not maybe fair when something's jank, it's usually jank because they made the friggin' game that way. So I don't know how much of it is just me. Twice since I've been playing, I think I've played about 4 or 5 hours now. Twice I've had to Google like a bug, nothing's happening, like I'm stuck. And just to find out that I wasn't stuck at all, it wasn't a bug and I was just being an idiot. And I was okay. Oh, So I'll give you one example, and I don't feel like this is that bad for me. So there's a section where you meet up with Mirren, I think her name is, which is from the first game. It's like the girl from the witch planet, with all the sisters, and she leads you through the desert, and she's taking you to meet up with Seer, and you have not seen her for ages, and you reach a door, and she just stops by this door, and you look at your map, and you're like, yeah, I'm supposed to go through there. And normally with the door, you get to it, you click R3, and the door opens, but nothing happens. So I started running around the environment, like, am I supposed to do something else? Am I supposed to talk to her? And no idea what. I was like, oh, it's broken. So I reloaded, did it again. Exactly the same thing happened. So I Googled it, like, what is going on? Is it bright? And someone had exactly the same issue as me, did exactly the same thing, and then had submitted a bug report, like an official bug report, and the response was, the force push the button on the door. And I was like, there's no button. But sure enough, there is a big old thing.
Is it one of those ones where there's a ball like stuck in a groove at the side of the wall and you have to push the ball around?
That was the second one that I didn't get.
Oh, okay.
The first one it's just a door with it looks like a lens sitting in the middle of the door, but usually things glow blue when you can interact with them with the force. But I think because of the color it was and the environment, it didn't look blue at all for me. It just looked gray. So I was like, oh, game's broke.
Stuck in the room.
But it was fine. And then the second one was, it was the ball in the groove in the wall. It's like an airlock room where you're supposed to push this ball. And I just was like, what the hell? And it turned out there was a stupid ball that you're supposed to push around. Which I was like, why have you just introduced this? And then it's probably a loading mechanic to load one area and another area.
Maybe.
But I've been really enjoying it. Even the my gripe about people returning and like coming back when you get to a meditation point and like people reappear hasn't seemed that bad the second time around. Like, it's actually seemed good in a way, because I'm like, oh, let me kind of go and redo some of those fights with enemies that I can bring back and get a bit of practice in if I want to in certain numbers of enemies and things like that. It's stunningly pretty game. Very well designed levels. Positives all round from me.
Which are you playing in sort of like performance mode or fidelity mode, or do you recall which one you went for?
I am playing in performance mode. One of the first things I did was to switch over. And weirdly though, like even in performance mode, you do seem to get some frame rate dips.
Yeah. That's what I was asking. Like,
I was surprised at. Like,
at launch, I remember Digital Foundry recommending people stick with quality or fidelity or whatever it's called, because the 30 FPS there was more stable than the frame rate in performance mode, which it would fluctuate in the 40s and the 50s and stuff like that, but those fluctuations caused hitching and hiccups and stuff like that was some people found more off-putting.
Oh, interesting. Maybe I'll give that a try then, because I've noticed a few like stutters and things, which I then funny enough, I thought to myself, wow, I'm glad I'm not playing in quality mode, because I bet this is horrendous. But hey, I'll give it a try. Maybe it won't be that bad.
I think my eyes got used to it eventually.
I just unlocked the crossguard stance, so you can get the Kylo Ren style sword, and I was like, this is absolutely wicked. I'm
interesting.
This.
I see. My reaction to that was like, oh, this is the most Dark Souls this game has ever felt, because now with the crossguard stance is a two-handed stance for anyone that hasn't seen it, which means that Cal's strikes are a lot more deliberate and take a lot more time to perform. And I was like, oh, I'm now having to consider sort of like how long each animation lasts, and like when I'm going to time my strikes against certain enemies. Unless you just kind of like overwhelm them and spam attacks, which still works sometimes. So it's interesting that you were drawn to that. Maybe I guess it's also a bit of a power fantasy play going on there, where it's nice feeling like you're wielding the Star Wars equivalent of like a greatsword or whatever.
There is, and I like the animations on the crossguard stance. Also, I think for me, it's one thing that I find is that game is very it's hard you can't like cancel an attack kind of, if you've hit the button too many times, if you've hit attack too many times, you're into an attack. And then if you actually try and like dodge out of it or something, you can't until that animation's finished. But with the crossguard stance, because it's more deliberate and more considered, I've found that I've not been over spamming square and then over committing, and then suddenly there's an enemy who's going to attack me and there's nothing I can do about it.
Right, yeah.
I because I'm considering each one of my hits more, and it's very defensive as well. So you can just like hold your defensive stance, like walk them down, and then beat the shit out of them, which is wicked.
Yeah, definitely fun.
You are right. Obviously, the jank, there is some jank in it, which was always going to be the case, I think. But I think that's always the way with like games that sort of push the envelope, that are pretty, that are big, that have all this sort of different stuff intertwined with them. But I really like the level design on Jedi Fallen Order and on this. I think they're very, very strong when it comes to the way that the player can sort of see the path ahead and actually, but it's that thing of not feeling like you're being sort of pushed down a corridor, but you can go where you want, but you really can't. I do like the way they've done the level design on these games, I think. And the space fantasy, the Star Wars side of it works really well, which I love. So yeah, man, no, really enjoying it.
Interesting. I'm curious to come back to that one when you finish it, because I would like to know your thoughts on that game's story, which ended up being one of my biggest disappointments with that title, I felt.
So what's weird about the story at the moment is I kind of have no idea what the hell I'm doing. From a story perspective, on an individual mission perspective, I'm fine because I'm like, okay, go here, do this. But then the overarching story at the moment, I'm kind of like, why am I even caring about this final
planet?
Very good
question, Jonesy. That's a very good question.
Is it Taladon or
Talanor?
Talanor, thank you. So yeah, Talanor, I'm like, okay, so I'm going to Talanor to get Jedi information because we've lost a lot of the archives. But do I really give a shit about that? I've done pretty well without that stuff on my own. Like it's a strange thing as well that I think Star Wars has a real problem with. When you know everything that happens in the future, you know everything that happens in the past, you have that strange thing where you're in the middle and you can't really do anything without messing up the lore. So you have to do these little weird niche stories that if you want to make it impactful, they kind of have to have done nothing by the end of the story.
Right, yes. Which you have to have a Rogue One situation, which is that was a fun ride. Also, they failed and died.
But then, to be fair to Rogue One, and I think this is the only reason it seemed to work for me with Rogue One is they're the ones who get the plans to Leia.
Right. Yes, and
for A New Hope. Yeah. So they end up managing to do the thing which saves the rebellion, because they blow up the Death Star. So they do have impact. Whereas with Cal Kestis and with the other, what he's trying to do, it's kind of like he's got that he never defeats Darth Vader. You know that he never does anything big because it's already done. It's already happened. So everything has to happen.
Same with the enemies that are presented. Like if a big bad Sith is presented at some point, who is a completely new character, you're like, well, you don't exist beyond this game, to my knowledge, unless there's, a movie's going to come up and pick up where this left off. But that seems hard to believe at this point.
No, absolutely. And then that's very strange because you're kind of like, well, if you're a big bad Sith and you came into existence at the beginning of the game and I defeated you before the end, you're not really that important to anything outside of this game.
Yeah. You're touching on some interesting points there, Jonesy. It's just, I know I mentioned last week, I kind of teased that I had started writing a script partly inspired by Jedi Survivor about video game antagonists. And I feel like you're already seeing a lot of what I saw and felt quite strongly about by the end of that game.
But I do have a superpower when it comes to games that I know you and Chris never had, which is I can play an entire game, enjoy it, think it was fantastic, and then you and Chris can be like, what did you think of the story? And I was like, I have no idea what happened.
I mean, that is a pretty good superpower.
You're like, what about this happened, the story and that? I'm like, I've got no idea what you're talking about. I just enjoyed the game for what it was.
Yeah, that's understandable. I think we will have games when we get to a certain point. I'm not suggesting this is the case with you and Jedi Survivor, but for example, my phone is the biggest enemy to cutscenes in the world. And I sometimes actively have to resist the temptation in games that I'm enjoying. I can feel my hand gravitating towards my pocket. Like, why do I want to go on my phone right now? The cutscene just started. This is important stuff.
Some cutscenes can drag though, especially if there's a bit that you don't necessarily care about and you want to get to the next bit of level, searching a level, or especially with a game like Jedi Survivor, because it is a bit of a what would you call it? What is that frigging game called? You track back and explore the same places again to go to places you couldn't go through before.
Metroidvania?
Metroid, thank you. Metroidvania kind of game. because there is a lot of that to it. In some respects, I don't really care about what the characters are saying. I've just got a new toy and I want to go back and open that area that I know I couldn't get to before to find the little trinket that was probably hidden there. And so I kind of do the same thing you do. I think I end up reaching for my phone and then I'm like, I miss some chat that I probably shouldn't listen to.
Well, I gave Jedi Survivor the benefit of the doubt and part of me wished I hadn't. So I wouldn't worry too much if it's, in one ear out the other at the moment.
Okay.
That's how that sounds. Anything else on the docket?
I will briefly mention Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which I checked out yesterday. Really enjoyed it. I thought it was very good. I thought it wasn't going to be great. I can't remember why. I think I'd heard a couple of opinions where people were like, oh, it's all right. But then I actually spoke to someone I shouldn't who told me that it was amazing and better than the first Guardians film. And I was like, shouldn't. Oh, is it as in because their opinion then made me think, oh shit, I'm so excited.
Oh, I see. I thought there's like a person who we'd agreed we would never talk to again.
No. As in, no, I just had a chat with a friend and they were like, oh, it's amazing. It's better than any of the other Guardians films. It's fantastic. You're really going to enjoy it. And I did, but a little part of me was like, oh, did that put my expectations up a little too high? But I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. It's a little bit of a weird one because it's the final in a trilogy.
Yes.
I came out kind of in a bit of a weird way that if it was the third film in a quadrilogy, I would have probably liked it a lot more. But knowing that it was the last installment of the trilogy, it kind of made me think I feel a little shortchanged in some respects. I don't want to give film away if people haven't seen it, but the what it focuses on in the film is very good and I enjoyed it, but I just kind of would have preferred it if they'd gone a slightly different direction.
Interesting. Yeah, I understand it's like a difficult one to talk around while the film is still in cinemas or in theaters in some cases, but at least it seemed like overall like a positive hit for the MCU at a time where, I think, that Ant-Man hadn't been particularly well received. The Jonathan Majors controversy was sort of hanging a little bit heavy over, and also just like the future of the MCU seems really weird.
It does seem a bit strange.
It just feels like it swings back and forth where every good film is greeted with the MCU is back and better than ever. Every bad film is greeted with the MCU has died and it will just never be what it was.
That's so true. I tell you what it did though, and I'm briefly going to make everyone listen to me talk about this just because I hope that anyone will be swayed to my way of thinking and then it'll make what I'm going to say more likely. It made me think about the Guardians of the Galaxy video game made by Eidos Montreal and Square Enix when they brought it out back in 2021, and how much I would love to see a sequel, which is maybe less likely these days because of what happened to Eidos Montreal following that game and the fact that it's now been bought up by Embracer Group and apparently has been a bit of shifting about and stuff. It's a little bit more complicated these days. It's not necessarily a given.
I don't know that much is a given over at Embracer at the moment, but we'll talk about that in a second.
We will, yes, which is, makes it doubly interesting. But anyone who hasn't played it and who has access to Game Pass, and if you like Guardians of the Galaxy, I really like that game. It's not a perfect game. It is not without bugs. It's not without flaws. But as a game that fits into the feel of the James Gunn, this iteration of Guardians of the Galaxy, I really enjoyed it. It's a game that I've even considered replaying just to get a little bit more of that.
Yeah, no, I actually have too. Like, it's one of those games where you have that thing of that you almost start to think, especially the narrative, because I think that was one of that game's strongest assets. You begin to forget bits and pieces of it, but you can still remember how much you appreciated it or enjoyed it. Yeah. And that kind of opens up the kind of the door for returning to that game. I was just trying to find something. There was something I was reading the other day. Do you know what I think it was? It was basically, I was reminded that I briefly took an interest in the career of a writer and narrative director in the games industry called Mary DeMarle. and she was the senior narrative director on Guardians of the Galaxy, and that followed on from her work also at Eidos on the more recent Deus Ex games, like Mankind Divided and Human Revolution, which I also thought were fantastic. And I'm pretty sure she has now left to join BioWare, and she is heading up the future of Mass Effect.
Oh, wow, okay.
So,
okay, that's interesting, because like you could see how someone with the narrative chops from like Guardians and what they did with that could actually really work on a Mass Effect.
Yes,
because it's totally similar.
Yeah, I don't know what inspired me to kind of go down that rabbit hole the other day and spend half an hour on Moby Games kind of tracking stuff. But yes, she went from, I've got it in front of me now, from narrative designer and lead writer on Human Revolution to executive narrative director on Mankind Divided to narrative lead on Guardians, and now as a senior narrative director at BioWare. And Lord knows they need someone like her. So
yeah.
Well, if Andromeda and Anthem were anything to go by, they need someone like her. But
it's funny because with Guardians, I'd love to go back and replay that game multiple times, just because for anyone who didn't play, like they included. Obviously, it's not like a branching narrative thing because you can't do that really properly. But you could effectively, like in some situations, be a dick and not get people on your side, or you could be a good person and get them on your side. And the end of the game had this big battle. I think we didn't want to talk about it at the time because we didn't want to give stuff away, but it kind of reminded me of the end of God of War Ragnarok, where you have people who are your mates who you've helped out earlier in the game who then come to help you. But actually, Guardians did it much better because it actually seemed to have like an impact whereby, like, I can't remember what happens, but if you were like good to Cosmo and you did something Cosmo liked, then Nowhere would turn up right at the end and they'd use this like giant cannon thing to, or laser gun or whatever to blast away load the enemies. And if you didn't have that, you'd have to have fought them. And then you have like this space dragon. If you're nice to it, it helps you. And if you weren't, then it wouldn't come and help you. And just this is fun stuff in that. It's just fun, man. It's just fun.
Especially like, fun to go full circle. That kind of reminds me of Mass Effect, and anyone who played, say, Mass Effect 2 and didn't understand sort of loyalty missions or any of that stuff, or parry on renegade decision making, and just got all of their crew killed permanently in Mass Effect 2. I'm sure there's someone out there who just like wandered into the end of that game unsure that was even possible, like had bad relationships with anyone, hadn't done any loyalty quests, chose the wrong person for every single role on that mission, and just killed everyone.
Yeah.
And was left with a very different Mass Effect 3, which is fun.
Absolutely. Like that sort of stuff can make a game, which I think that's fun. But and that's me done anyway. What have you been playing or doing this week?
Well, it's kind of been pretty bite-sized for me. And one of the things I've been taking advantage of, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, we're still kind of in the hangover period following Summer Game Fest and the various showcases that took place of the last week. But that means one good thing that usually comes out this time of year is demos. One of which is kind of one of the more talked about demos, amongst people online people in the past week, which is Final Fantasy 16. That demo, of course, out on the PS5, which I played, and it's kind of a weird take on a demo in that it's not actually a demo. It's sort of the first 2 hours of the game that it then sort of cuts off at a very key story point, and your save data will carry over to the final game if you decide that you want to purchase it and continue that adventure. And I think Final Fantasy 16, it seems pretty good. I know some people are fucking head over heels for this video game and are pre-ordering it and are going crazy, and it's received a lot of positive press in the last couple of weeks as people have kind of got hands-on with it. And I think a lot of that press is really well-deserved. I just think, and I'm conscious of the fact that I am not a Final Fantasy guy. I've tried at times to be a Final Fantasy guy, and it hasn't always worked. The closest it came to working, perhaps because I was at my oldest and most mature and my most world-weary, was Final Fantasy VII Remake when that came out 3 years ago, and I had a good time with that. I was frustrated by a number of different things, but overall I enjoyed myself. And I think that if I stuck with, or purchased and then stuck with Final Fantasy 16, I'd have a similar experience. There's a certain amount of patience that I feel is required of me like almost waiting for Stockholm Syndrome to settle in, and the kind of what I see, at least, or I interpret as slightly weird, stilted writing, voice acting, line delivery, cutscene direction, and blocking and pacing. Everything just always feels slightly off to me with Final Fantasy in a way that it takes me a little while to wrap my head around, and that was present a number of times, even just in this sort of 2-hour-long demo for 16. The thing that feels different this time around, one is the combat system, which is a real-time combat system that I think was primarily designed by someone with a lot of experience with the Devil May Cry series. Apologies, I'm not super well read on kind of on all the different individuals that have kind of come together to collaborate on 16, but I know that there are a lot of heavy hitters there. The combat has been a big focus, and it felt, I'd say, really good, like really tight, really responsive, everything you'd want from like what is, I think, shaping up to be one of the more action-oriented Final Fantasy games, certainly mainline Final Fantasy games.
I will
recent memory.
I will interject just to say that I'd seen a story in the week. I just remembered when you were talking about that to look it up. Say it was the combat director has called Final Fantasy 16 his personal masterpiece.
Yeah, and if he's worked on DMC games in the past, which I feel like he might have done, I mean that's saying something. And it totally seems like it's got that flexibility, that cliche of like it's going to be easy to pick up, and when you mash square, it's very responsive, and you send out a flurry or a combo of light attacks, and everything's right with the world. But then you watch someone who's played it for 200 hours, pull off a combo, and you're like, I don't know how the fuck they did that.
Am I playing the same game?
Yeah, literally. Which is the hallmark of a really solid and flexible and but also accessible action game, and it seems like they're really trying to push to make this a game that anyone can play regardless of their experience with Final Fantasy as a series or with action games. Of course, you've got the added benefit of this as a mainline Final Fantasy game not being connected to anything else, as much as the number 16 might be off-putting to some people. This is a completely new story and new set of characters, so I'm curious. I just don't know if I can jump in at full price on day one. It's tough. I might have to remind myself what is, or I guess rather what isn't coming out in July. And if things are looking a little bit bare, if the cupboards are looking a bit empty, then maybe I take the plunge on payday. But yeah, I don't know. How are you feeling about it?
It's a weird Final Fantasy. I think I bought 15.
Yeah, I remember.
And I spent a few hours. I spent a few hours with it. I found it very odd, insofar as not just as a Final Fantasy game, but because it was like this. It was supposed to be this open world Final Fantasy game that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can totally get down with this. I've played obviously loads of open world games, and then it was so weird because it wasn't open world. It was like it was like dictated open world. It was like one of those game TV shows that's like written reality. That's kind of how it felt to me. It's like it's supposed to be open, but it's kind of not. It's supposed to be combat that's completely free and flowing, but it's kind of not. And I fell off that hard. But it's a very, very good looking game, and the animations are cracking and all of that.
Yeah,
I would love to play the demo for this. I think I will probably do that, but I'd be very surprised if that translated to me into actually like getting the game.
I wonder, because I think it. Although I can see what you saw in 15, and I did at times too, although I never took the plunge, I think 16 could be more up your alley. Like, I think I genuinely think that combat system makes a really strong first impression.
Right.
And I think if you can kind of get down with what doesn't do it any favors, although I guess it's a common thing, is that it's got a lot of in media res storytelling, which I think is a little bit jarring when you're not already on board with Final Fantasy as a series, because you're thrust into the middle of these conversations or these meetings or these wars, and there are different families and factions and individuals and concepts, and a lot of them are being flung at you left, right, and center in the early stages of that game. And for as much as you can pick up the kind of the Game of Thrones influences that have been touted in the build up to this game, there's a lot very quickly, and it all seems to be much like I complained about the Final Fantasy VII remake. There's a fucking whirlwind of shit happening, and at the epicenter of it all is a protagonist who seems far more concerned with the grunting or groaning than actually saying something or being someone.
Right.
Now, the game then flashes back and you learn a lot more about this character's backstory in a way that I think quite quickly made him more interesting than I pretty much ever found Cloud to be in Remake. But then I don't know, maybe I was just being a bit too... I just didn't like a lot of the writing in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I there's some of that present here, but there's some stuff that seems to be better presented as well.
Right.
So, yeah. We'll see.
Interesting. Well, you never know. Maybe by next week I will have played the demo as well, and then I'll have my own.
I'll be curious on your thoughts. We'll also have reviews, I assume, by this time next week, so you'll be able to scratch your head as you sit there saying, I played 2 hours of one of the worst games I've ever seen in my life. And I tell you, it's got a 97 on Metacritic. Probably not, but yeah. And then 2 more quick ones from the kind of the indie scene. There's a demo out now, I think on most platforms, for Viewfinder, which people might remember as the game where you kind of have it's like a puzzler that kind of visually is reminiscent of things like maybe The Witness, but you have a Polaroid camera, you take snaps of the environment around you, and you use these photos to create extensions of the world. So like that you might find a picture or a painting of like a weird staircase, and you hold that up in front of your eyes and go click, and then that physically manifests in the environment in a way that when you first do it is really kind of surreal. And I actually kind of cackled the first time I did it. It's really interesting. The demo starts presenting you with prefabbed photos or paintings or drawings. And even at some point, it even goes into kind of like stills from certain games and like rip-offs of Tetris and Super Mario Brothers, to kind of introduce you to the concept of how you can place stuff in the environment, and it becomes an extension of that environment. And then you get to the point, like I said, where you end up with a camera yourself, and you're kind of thinking about, how can I take a picture of like a chair and then place it in the distance so that it becomes like a massive chair? Again, it riffs off some ideas that we've seen in other sort of first-person puzzle games in the past, but I think there's enough of a unique, trying to avoid puns here, but enough of a unique perspective to kind of carve out its own sort of spot. And for anyone, I didn't do a great job explaining it, but if you just look at the trailer, any trailer for this game is called Viewfinder, you'll immediately see what I'm talking about. And if you, like, all I can tell you is that my reaction to doing those things in the demo was the exact same as my reaction to the first time I saw them being done in a trailer, which was, oh shit. And that's pretty cool when games nowadays something makes you do that in a game.
You've kind of conjured up to me I played a bit of oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it now. The one where you're in an environment and you can go bigger or smaller, and it's got a layout of the world in the center of the game world.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. And it had a story. It's like a romance story that's played in VO over the top. Oh God, what was that called? It was a PlayStation Plus game.
It was.
I played it and I finished it and I can't remember its name.
You can move things in the little world and move things in the big world, and then you get out of the big world into another world, and then you can see everything. It's very, very surreal, but that kind of perspective jarring, but very clever puzzling.
Maquette.
Thank you, Maquette. That was it. Yes.
Yeah. There's another one that I can't remember its name, but every time I see it in a trailer, I'm super impressed by it, and it plays on how big an object is relative to how close to your view it is. And so, like, if you imagine, like a chair, if you hold the chair right in front of your face and then sort of drop it, it manifests in the environment as massive, because that's kind of what it looked like. But if you push it away and make it smaller and then drop it, it manifests as tiny. And it's got I should remember the names for all these first puzzle titles, but I can't.
That's what's funny is it always makes me think of the bit from Father Ted where he's trying to explain to Father Dougal. He's like, he's got a small model of a cow, and he's like, this is small, but those are far away. And he's like pointing out the window because he doesn't understand that idea of distance.
Yes, or in of course in the comedy film Four Lions, where one of the terrorists buys what he insists is a proper AK-47 replica, but when it arrives, it is like fucking 10 inches long. So he suggests they just hold it closer to the camera. He
Right, I
also
haven't
at
seen
one
that.
point, he also at one point implies that it only looks small because he's got big hands. When in fact, it's like I said, it's like an 8-inch long AK-47 replica.
I think that's a line lots of men have tried to use over the years.
Big hands, brother, big hands. Thoroughly, I don't know. There might be some people who find the film Four Lions a bit strong by today's standards, but if that's on streaming platforms, that is one that I would recommend to just about anyone. And one last quick one, Jonesy, which I don't know if you remember from the Xbox showcase, I think it was, but it made an interesting first impression on both of us. And turns out it's got a demo on Steam. Jusant.
Oh yeah,
Just had.
yes,
Yeah. It turns out we were right. Jusant is in fact a French word.
Okay.
And it basically means low tide, which I think the relevance here is that this is essentially set in an environment where it appears as though this kind of tower and this big mountainside have now only revealed themselves because all the water has kind of left this environment.
Right.
And you play as this lone explorer who is ascending this mountain or this tower, and as they do so, finding more about the people who lived there along the way. And as we speculated at the time when we saw it debut during that showcase, it is essentially a rock climbing game, and that's really cool. It starts off with, so you reach for holdings with the left analog stick, and you grab them with your right hand's on the right trigger and your left hand's on the left trigger. So you only have to worry about your arms, and the legs will follow. Where it gets interesting is that up to 4 times you can kind of hook your rope into the face of the wall or whatever, which obviously acts as a safety in case you fall in the fall further up, and it's kind of like a self-made checkpointing system. But it also allows for other features, like if you hook yourself into the wall and you kind of like point there, you can actively lower yourself. An anchor, thank you. Then you can create more give in the rope and start wall running left to right to kind of cover big distances horizontally. There are times where you almost use it in a grappling hook or a rappel style fashion. So a lot of kind of interesting climbing or climbing adjacent functions that all stem from this rope that you can kind of reel back in instantly as well. I think that what was interesting though is that rather than being a game where you're upgrading your stamina or upgrading the length of your rope, this seems far more intent to be a slightly more calm, meditative experience where it's hey, slowly climb this mountain at your own pace with, sort of mechanics that are intriguing, but never truly challenging or
right.
This doesn't seem like a game that's interested in creating a moment where to get to the peak of this mountain is going to be really fucking hard. You're going to have to do some extreme stuff with your fingers. You're not. I think this is about a character making its way up a mountain / tower, finding more about the civilization or the people who kind of lived there before. It's interesting. I hope it's going to be a Game Pass game, because that seems like an appropriate kind of place to experience something like that. And I also hope that it doesn't run more than 4 or 5 hours. I hope this is a game that kind of knows the lane it's in without sounding too harsh.
I think that's fair. I think that sounds, having seen obviously the trailers and stuff. Yeah, I think you're bang on with that. I mean, no one wants to play a 20-hour climbing game with little progression and skills and things where you're just that's gonna get old fast.
Yeah, and a silent protagonist, like you said, no upgrade systems. Even it doesn't even seem to have collectibles. You just kind of find notes written by people who came before in some kind of loose sense. So yeah, I hope it doesn't outstay its welcome, but I think its climbing fundamentals are going to be interesting enough in almost like a Death Stranding way. This is someone saw Death Stranding was let's make the rock climbing equivalent of that, but also strip it right back down so that if the game's 3 to 4 hours, that will be people getting their fill. But you'll still have a meditative climbing experience where traversal is the game's progression system.
Okay. No, yeah, it sounds good. Sounds decent.
Yeah, that demo available on Steam for anyone who wants to check that out. And with that, Jonesy, how about we head back into the world of we head back to the scrapings that we mentioned earlier.
Let's do it. Let's scrape.
Okay, That's great. Well, as any good gaming podcasters would, we are always desperate for an opportunity to talk about Grand Theft Auto 6 because it means we can put it in the tags, maybe even put it in the title, maybe even put it in the thumbnail. We can't do any of those things this time. That would be really clutching at straws. But we can talk a little bit about one of Rockstar Games' founders, Dan Houser, and what he has going on next. So was it 2020, Jonesy, that Dan Houser, one of them, of course, the Houser brothers, left the company?
I believe it was 2020, yes.
Yeah, I have a vague recollection of us chatting about that from Chris's living room. It was at that phase of the Super Show. He was not just a co-founder of Rockstar, by the way. He was also a creative director and was the head writer for a lot of their games, of course, in the Grand Theft Auto series, as well as Red Dead Redemption and Bully. He left a handful of years ago, and exactly what he was doing next wasn't entirely clear. I think there were some like rumors and murmurs here or there. I think at one point he was even being tied to some weird, dodgy like NFT or kind of like, I don't know. There was some bullshit, but now we have a little bit more clarity on exactly what he's creating, or at least the kind of things he wants to create next. And it is a less bullshit. It doesn't seem to be some weird NFT or like cryptocurrency adjacent plan. He's launched a company called Absurd Ventures, who are going to focus on creating characters and worlds that can be expressed in many different forms, Jonesy, including video games, which I guess is the obvious starting point, but also TV, books, film, graphic novels, and podcasts. The quote that we've got from Dan himself is, "We're building Absurd Ventures to create new universes and tell great stories wherever and however we can." And their tagline, for what it's worth, is storytelling, philanthropy, and ultra-violence, which I presume that kind of loop means they're going to create a fantastic product, storytelling. They're going to give all the money away to charity that they make from it, philanthropy. They're then going to realize that made them broke, and there's infighting will follow, and that's the ultra-violence.
I think you're probably right. Okay, so we said that we don't think it's bullshit like the NFT thing. I kind of think it's a bit of bullshit.
Oh, okay.
Only because if you look at their sort of like Twitter that they've come out with, it's only been alive sort of 3 days at this point. Some of it is, it's kind of what I think the word is like. So new companies often want to be disruptive because there's this big buzzword that, if you're disruptive, if you disrupt like the ecosystem that you get into as a business, then that's how you like make the money and you become the new hot topic in that area. It is a bit like the fact that they're sort of saying, we're going to go after not just video games, but we're going after all of these different platforms. And yeah, the tagline weirded me out a bit because it's like, philanthropy thing is like, well, you've not really got a company yet. You've not made anything. Maybe worry about getting some money before you talk about who you're going to give it all your money away to. And then the ultra violence thing disrupt? How do we become a disruptor?
Yeah.
Just say we're ultra violence, we could use violence. And then I think it was on their Twitter, they also said it's something like they're bringing people together by giving everyone something to hate.
Okay, yeah, like they're proper edgy kind of like, we're not like other creative companies.
But the irony is, of course, they're like every other creative company, and they spread themselves too thin. They try and make multiple IPs across multiple different types of media. And it's a bit of a weird, it's a bit of a strange one.
Yeah. Also, just a quick interjection here. When you read something like, when a company says that they're willing to go into video games, TV, books, film, graphic novels, and podcasts, and the founder says, we want to tell stories wherever and however we can, there's a little bit of desperation in that, isn't there? Like, oh, we'll do anything. Oh, yes, we'd love to make a video game, but you want us to do a scripted podcast? We're there. We're your company. Like, wouldn't it be more ambitious to say, no, we're a video game company or we're a feature film company? Like, I get wanting to do everything, but saying you're going to do everything and then saying we're going to tell stories however and wherever we can is a bit like, we'll just see where the money is and kind of hope for the best.
It feels a little like that they're like, who are you? Like, what do you do? What are Absurd Ventures doing? It's like, we've got Dan Houser. And you're like, that's wicked. Yeah, from Rockstar, totally. But what are you doing? And it's like, we've got Dan Houser. And you're like, this is just get the people on board, make up the bullshit like media stuff, and then you're hoping build it and they will come. And then you'll suddenly be inspired and you'll have all these amazing stories, IP. Like, but at the moment you've got nothing. You've got people with some capital. You've probably got some venture capitalists backing you up. They've said that they will announce in future who's backing them financially. A lot of stuff they're putting out is like this disruptive kind of stuff. It's also scattershot. If you go to their website, it's sort of like retro footage with meaningless phrases that just try and be like, the world is different. Can you dream again? We're here to make the world change. And like, oh, you're not saying anything. And then another video that they put out will have like a cyborg with like light up eyes and it's looking shifty. It's very strange.
Yes.
And what's strange is like, so when Hideo Kojima, and I don't want to, just keep banging on about Kojima, but when Kojima did it with Kojima Productions, that there are stories and characters and ludicrous narratives behind his eyes just screaming to get out. And with him, it's almost like, how can you control him and put it down and get it out and make money out of it, right? I imagine that's how it went, and but you know that you can do it. This seems a little bit like the other way around. Like they've got a creative director who, I don't know how much of a hand he had in actually sort of like making those the creative directions of those games, and how much he did that, and how much of it is it, no, he's just a good businessman who can pull the right people together to make stuff. And it can be really different when you go out on your own and you try and do something with other people.
Like, don't get me, like, so Dan Houser was always sort of described as the more creative of the Houser brothers, and that the split, if you had to define one, was Dan was creative, Sam was business. But like, those Rockstar games have always felt like very collaborative processes. There are a lot of names, whether you're talking about the founding of the company or the, the creative individuals behind each GTA entry or Red Dead or wherever you want to go. Like, yes, the Housers' names were often, plastered all over the place, but there were a lot of other people there as well. And I think that's why, there's a general confidence, a vibe that even in this post Dan Houser, post Leslie Benzies environment the Rockstar's going into, like, there's no one sitting around and going, God, GTA 6 is going to be dead in its ass just because Dan Houser's not around. I think there's kind of an accepted thing that he was a talented dude who I'm sure informed a lot of the creative direction that company went in and was a very important force in introducing those franchises. But like, how, like, it's exactly what you said, how that applies to future ventures is very hard to determine, especially when you're not talking about a very singular, very unique creative presence that someone like Hideo Kojima would be a more pertinent example of. Although, speaking of Leslie Benzies, that's perhaps one thing that that Dan Houser does have going for him, is that when you're talking about the backing these companies are receiving, when you're talking about the kind of capital or the venture capitalists who might be interested in something like this, Leslie Benzies is like an advertisement for the fact that having your name associated with franchises like Grand Theft Auto can't be a bad thing, because, of course, he founded Build a Rocket Boy all the way back in 2017, so that company is now 6 years old. And then, of course, they are working on the hard to describe and hard to pin down open world game Everywhere that absolutely has metaverse elements to it, where it's kind of like there is a game at the forefront of it that players can enter, and they can go to different districts to take part in different spins like on certain genres. But there are also game within a game elements present in Everywhere. Even the name itself suggests like the idea of, hey, I was one of the key figures like in making Grand Theft Auto the monster that it is, and I want to create the game, and it's called Everywhere, and people threw money at him. I'm sure that's something that Dan Houser is well aware of, and is like, I just need to create a company and start like loosely throwing my weight around and pretending I'm going to disrupt any creative industry that will have me, and money will follow. And it probably did.
It's funny you say about like Build a Rocket Boy. I signed up for the to get notifications about Everywhere when they came out, and during Summer Game Fest, I think it was like a couple of days later, I had an email to say watch the trailer for, I can't remember the name of it, but so they'd had a trailer for Everywhere, and then they had a trailer for like one of the games contained within Everywhere, like one of the ways that sort of
was it Mind's Eye?
Yes, Mind's Eye. Thank you. And so I had an email notification to say, watch the trailer for Mind's Eye. And I watched it. I started to watch it. I was like, I've seen this already. Like, why are they sending me a notification about this? And it was like, there's no new trailers out. It was just kind of like, until new stuff comes out, why don't you check out these trailers that we've got? And I was like, is that really a new email to tell me to watch something I've watched months ago. Like it feels like a bit vaporware at the moment, just in so far as what is this? Like, is the it's a bit random at the moment, but
it doesn't help when the idea or the elevator pitch for something is so broad and so all encompassing that you just kind of sit back and go like, okay, buddy, yeah. Like you left Rockstar, you're going to create a brand new studio from scratch up in Scotland that is going to create like all of this. And it's one of those
Cloud Imperium games.
Well, Cloud Imperium are a weird example because they've done the fascinating move of like continuing to keep up the impression, or I don't want to call it the illusion, but they're giving people the impression that they're still plotting forward on whatever fucking warpath they see themselves as on, and they're continuing to let you fund it ad nauseum. I think Everywhere will be one of those projects, and we talk about these sometimes when we see very ambitious looking trailers during showcases, during things like Summer Game Fest all the time. This is something that will come out. It will just look different to what we imagined. Like they will reach the point where they were like, okay, how do we scale this down, or how do we turn this into a product that goes on store shelves, or whatever their end goal is for it. They start to maybe sand down or smooth some of the edges until they have a product that can be released or is easy to absorb and understand and digest for consumers. Because I know a lot of people who will buy GTA 6 who wouldn't understand what Everywhere was if you tried to explain it to them. And that's still, the uphill challenge that I think companies, the biggest companies in the world are continuing to face. Meta, of course, foremost amongst them when it comes to explaining it. Some very rich people's unique visions for the future at the moment, and how some video game companies are trying to tap into that. But I don't know where that leaves Absurd Ventures, though, remains to be seen.
It's one of those. No, absolutely. Like for me, it's going to work. Of course, it will. It's like because it's got Dan Houser attached to it, because of the pedigree like that he can trace back. I think at the moment though, we're probably in the weird kind of early times where in a year's time, maybe, or maybe in 2 years' time, these early first steps, these baby steps of media or of Twitter, or of videos that they're putting out will probably be long forgotten, and there'll be quite a different, more traditional looking video game developer or publisher and developer will be out there, and they won't be talking about, because it's the thing, like you can talk about podcasts, and you can talk about animation, and you can talk about films and graphic novels when you have an IP which everyone wants. So like The Matrix covered all of these areas when it came out because it was such a hot property, but the Animatrix came out after The Matrix. Like The Matrix had already done the groundwork. It had already made the Wachowskis household names of like this amazing vision that they had. They'd already made like shitloads of films before The Matrix came out. They'd all been attached to a load of stuff in movie making. They didn't just say first up, oh, we're going to make the Animatrix. Like, that's not where they started. They had to start somewhere else. So I think this will get like focused. I think they'll manage to focus this project down into being something a bit more.
I hope, yes. I hope so.
I think you're right with Everywhere as well. I think Everywhere is going to be the same deal. It's going to be just the same.
Which, I kind of understand it a little bit. These people probably go out into the big wide world after working at Rockstar for pretty much their whole careers. And there probably are a lot of people around them who kind of gas them up, and they probably get very excited about, what the potential for this space or, the kind of products that they're going to be creating is. But at the same time, selfishly, I'd be a lot more excited if Dan Houser came out and was like, I've created a small video game studio, and we're going to be creating a mid-budget, action adventure video game that, like, doing what a lot of developers have done in recent years. Like, I'm going to spin off and create a project that is very heavily inspired by the shit that I used to make. And there have been success stories and not so successful stories in that space in recent years, and that would have been cool to see from one of the GTA guys, in inverted commas, but not to be.
I think the thing that drives it over me is you can look at people that absolutely should know 100% what they're doing. They've been doing it for years, and they still fuck it up. Like, think of it as something like Marvel's Avengers or like Anthem. These games that should have been easy wins, and they weren't. And so when a new company comes out and is like, we're going to do it better and different, you're like, mate, just try and make something that works first.
Yes, exactly. It's interesting, in fact, that you mentioned Marvel's Avengers, because one of the fascinating kind of elements that was so notable about the Marvel's Avengers fuck-uppery was some of the talent involved. You had the likes of Crystal Dynamics leading the charge, and of course there were talks that other teams around IDOS, for example, were helping out in that big push under Square Enix's banner to get that game where it needed to be. In the end, it didn't get to where it needed to be, and Square Enix decided that they were going to sell off most of their Western development arm for a fee in the range of $300 million. And of course, if there were one company in the year of our Lord 2023 who were there to snap them up, to gobble them up in any IP,
who would wrap their arms around them and take them in?
Yeah, who would welcome them with a warm, loving embrace, but the Embracer Group themselves. And that has been a familiar story that we've heard, far and wide over the last couple of years. Embracer continuing to grow, making high-profile investments all over around the industry. I think at the moment they've got it up to 12 operating groups overseeing 138 internal studios with an ownership or control of around 850 IPs, which you'd think would leave them in a pretty good position to start making hella money by taking these IPs to creating video games based off these IPs and putting high-quality video games in the hands of consumers. Unfortunately, Embracer have been struggling a little bit on just about every front, whether it's creating video games, creating high-quality video games, shout out to Saints Row, then also for that reason, not ending up in the hands of consumers. And it also is worth noting that they've had a few trouble with some of their business, a bit of trouble with some of their business dealings of late as well. You might remember that I think just last month, the shares in the company nosedived by over 40% when what was to be a major $2 billion partnership fell through unexpectedly at the 11th hour. And now, Jonesy, to cut to the chase, we are dealing with the repercussions from that deal falling through. CEO of the Embracer Group, Lars. Are we going to say Wingefors?
I thought, yeah,
Lars.
I don't know. I can't remember. Lars. Yeah, Wingefors. I don't know.
Wingefors. Well, let's just call him Lars because we're going to feel like we're close mates by the end of the segment anyway. He put an open letter out on the company's website saying that they needed to make Embracer leaner, stronger, and more focused, self-sufficient company. For anyone who maybe hasn't worked in the corporate environment before or hasn't heard a CEO referring to a need to make a company leaner and stronger in the past, what that means is it's layoff time.
Leaner, stronger, and more efficient are all bad terms you don't want to hear in business.
Exactly.
Someone said to me the other day, it's funny every time a company talks about making something like leaner and more efficient, what they mean is they're going to fire half the staff but expect you to do twice as much if you're still there after. So you're like, yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah, exactly. And it rarely ends well. And whilst Lars is being coy, I will say, though, on the exact specifics of what that will entail, Embracer currently, his words not mine, engages close to 17,000 people. And while that number will be lower by the end of the year, it's too early to give an exact forecast on this. Josie, a lot of people pointing out that while, of course, no one in Embracer could have foreseen that would have been a fairly significant $2 billion deal was going to fall through last month. And obviously, there was that famous moment where I think Lars himself did a series of interviews like the morning after that deal had fallen through at like midnight the night before. And he looked like a broken man. I don't think this was in anyone's plans, as layoffs rarely are, if we're, in the best case scenario. But a lot of people are pointing out that this is a very strange situation where a company makes headlines, let's be real, for its high-profile investments, continues to spend money. We talked about that Square Enix sort of partial acquisition for $300 million earlier. There are other high-profile ones. Obviously, it owns companies such as THQ Nordic, Koch Media / Deep Silver, Saber Interactive, Gearbox. In December of 2021, it purchased a French board game company called Asmodee for 2.75 billion euros. That was its largest acquisition to date. The Gearbox acquisition was 1.4 billion euros. That's two currencies, $1.4 billion.
I like that, $1 billion euros. That's going to be the
That's
that's the new currency.
It's like euro, isn't that like euro dollars or something? I
can't remember. No, I don't remember.
Yeah. Basically, they've been spending a lot of money on things where people haven't always been able to see the inherent value of these deals, and now they are restructuring. I mean, am I wrong for thinking that's a bad look when, like, 1 year you're spending nearly 3 billion euros on a board game company, and the next year a $2 billion deal, so a smaller number, falling through, sees your shares nosedive by over 40%, and your company needing to become leaner?
I think the problem is, with a lot of this sort of stuff is the addiction to like looking at share prices and to speculating and stuff sometimes isn't that important. It's more like how the company's actually running behind the scenes and how like cash flow is working, what's going on in the industries. And we know that in the last sort of few years, it's not been good. You know, COVID had a hell of a hit on video games. And if you're a massive company like Embracer Group and you're buying up all these companies and then effectively taking them under your umbrella, and then everyone in the whole industry is struggling, you're going to struggle. You know, you're not meeting the positions you wanted to be in, or your forecasts. And if your forecasts are bad, you start talking about, well, how can we save money? And then if you have all of these companies underneath you, yeah, the first thing you're going to do is start talking about making it efficiencies and getting leaner and what are our overheads on staff costs? Oh, they're excessive because we've got 18,000 people underneath us or engaged by us or whatever they say. So that they say, actually, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to lay a shitload of those people off. And this is the other side of, I think, when we all get excited when a small studio that we really like is bought by a big company, and then we say, oh, now they've got fuck you money and they can finally fulfill the visions that they've had in the past. The other side of that coin is when that company with all that money loses a shit ton of that money, they're going to fire shitloads of your staff because that's the only way they know to dig themselves out of a hole. And the first thing they're going to do is cancel projects, lay people off, try and focus on things that do make them money, and to double down on things that they think might make them more money, and to not be as experimental. And it kind of, in bad financial times, it leads to really bad outcomes. I mean, maybe smaller companies could weather the storm in some respects. Honestly, you know, I think it was it's Double Fine talk about in that documentary, talk about back in the day when they effectively would have gone bust if it wasn't for the fact that what is his name? Tim
Schafer.
Tim Schafer, thank you. Tim Schafer's mate gave them a shitload of money and bailed the company out. But obviously you can't go to your mate who's got just 10 billion knocking around if you're Embracer Group and get bailed out.
Yeah.
But you can if you're a smaller company. But it's really sad state of affairs, and it's going to be really sad to see all these people laid off.
Yeah.
We don't know how many at this point, like I said, but
no, we don't. And it's people laid off, which is sad, and then slightly less sad, but still worth noting, projects cancelled. And like one of the things you talked about was that, like, Embracer has now racked up 850 IPs from around gaming, and a lot of their strategy has been to take over kind of beloved franchises. Like I joked about Saints Row earlier, but that was absolutely something I was looking at and saying, God, I really hope Volition benefit from this new cash flow and kind of, not only did that not materialize in the form of the game, but you know, a lot of the way that Embracer reacted to Saints Row's failure and what happened to Volition and their kind of like seemingly folding into Gearbox kind of also painted a weird picture for how Embracer might react to games that don't meet their targets, and where Embracer's forecasts might be for how successful some of these projects might end up being. Like the vibe I got at the time was that here's a company who is picking up, I don't even know, like pick any number of licenses, whether you could even start with Saints Row, and drastically overestimating like those franchises' capacity to sell big numbers with today's audiences. That's all of which is a roundabout way of saying I actually think that for all the money they spent, Embracer are holding a lot of like dead wood at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
And maybe this helps in that sense. Like maybe if the IPs that are cut or that don't get worked on, or the projects that are scrapped are from things that that don't have a future, that might be beneficial. But one of the things that we were going to discuss is whether or not our old pal Lars and his team around him are best suited to pick out which projects are winners. Because one thing I will say is that I think the rest of the year looks fairly strong for Embracer. For anyone wondering, Remnant 2, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, Payday 3, Hot Wheels Unleashed 2, Arizona Sunshine 2, Alone in the Dark, and Homeworld 3, to name but a few, are all Embracer games slated for the rest of this year. I think some of those titles have the capacity to sell okay, but none of them are like world beaters.
They're not money spinners, any of them, are they?
That's the problem. Yeah. We also know we have confirmation at this point that Crystal Dynamics have confirmed that they are that there will be no impact, in their own words, on their continuing efforts on Perfect Dark, who they're working on with the initiative, and the kind of reboot of the Tomb Raider series that's happening in collaboration with Amazon Games. But the problem is that in and amongst all of this, Lars was talking about the ways in which they can bounce back. And as you said, none of those titles we mentioned just there were money spinners. What Lars sees as the potential money spinners, and one of the things he has picked out is Lord of the Rings. Now, for anyone that's wondering, the most recent release with the come under the Lord of the Rings banner was, of course, Lord of the Rings Gotham. It's weird. I've got a bit of a short-term memory problem this podcast. I can't really remember how well received that game was or what impact, positive or negative, it had on the Lord of the Rings brand. But I will say, I'm going to take Lars at his words. He said, quote, I mean, we own Lord of the Rings, and we know we need to be exploiting the Lord of the Rings in a very significant fashion and turning that into one of the biggest gaming franchises in the world. And that's obviously something we're going to be doing. So let me ask you, Jonesy, hypothetically, if you were an employee at an unnamed studio that fell under the banner of the Embracer Group, layoffs were coming, the company's stock nosedived by 40%, projects were being cancelled left, right, and centre, and you're wondering about what the future looked like, and you heard your CEO in the wake of the Lord of the Rings Gollum release, which I don't think Embracer really had anything to do with. I think that was a pre-standing agreement and a game that had been in development for some time. But he described the need to exploit the Lord of the Rings in a very significant fashion and turn it into one of the biggest gaming franchises in the world. How sure would you be that you were going to continue to be able to pay your rent?
I'd be rubbing my hands together, Jamie, knowing that I already had a sequel to Gollum in my midst, and that I'd already been given a tasty little loan, or no, not a loan. What was it? A gift from a German government? Was it like a local? I can't remember.
Like, so weird German government grant, yeah.
No, like this is bizarre. Like this quote is. I understand what he's saying insofar as I can imagine that if you are a company with a whole load of developers underneath you and you're like, we own friggin' Lord of the Rings, man, you'd think that you should be able to monetize that into video games. And and if you're out there, if you're watching people play for decades, like games like League of Legends or any of that sort of ilk, you'd be thinking, well, we can just make that sort of game that people pump money into, and we'll just skin it like it's Lord of the Rings, and we'll make a bloody fortune. I can absolutely imagine like maybe that's the kind of thinking that they do, thinking that it should be a foregone conclusion that Lord of the Rings is a massive money spinner. But the problem is, you just got to look at Gollum and see how utter shite that was, because they thought that all you needed was the name Lord of the Rings. Yeah, and therefore you make money, but that's not how that works. You have to actually come up with a good video game.
Well, it applies to other things as well, doesn't it? Because it wasn't that long ago that Amazon Games announced they're going to develop and publish a Lord of the Rings MMO. Amazon themselves learned firsthand with the, let's call it the frosty reception that TV show received, that again, throwing money at a license like Lord of the Rings and turning that into a massive, like Game of Thrones inspired high budget TV show, not a recipe for success just because the right name is on the box.
No, absolutely. And I think it's, I don't know how to, if it was easy, then it would be easy to do. But how do you take something like Lord of the Rings and actually do a justifiable bit of media which is going to appeal to the fans and make you a load of money? Like, I've got no idea. I don't know how you do that.
Me neither.
Everyone, they thought they could do that with Marvel. They thought, Square thought they could do that with Avengers. And they thought that this is easy. We'll just make a co-op game. We'll make it look pretty. We'll make it so you can play as your favorite characters. Come on, it's billions and billions of dollars. It's easy. And it was crap. So I can only assume that the Embracer have got similar ideas and they're thinking, no, it's easy. We should just be able to do this. But apparently it's not so easy. Apparently it's actually difficult. I'll work for them. Do you know what we'll do? We'll make God of War. We'll take that and we'll reskin it so you're Aragon or whatever.
How do we get the God of War license?
No, not God of War. We'll take that type of game, the new God of War, and we'll make our own version like they did with what was the game? The Gears of War ripoff that they made. I can't remember. Quantum thingy?
Yeah, I always forget it because it was a PS3 game and I was
Quantum Break.
No, Quantum Break was the Remedy game.
Oh, right.
But if it did, I might have had the word quantum in it. God, that was a weird time for games.
And then you had the other one, which was a God of War ripoff, which was the Inferno.
Dante's Inferno.
Dante's Inferno, that they did the same thing, which is just a complete ripoff. Like, just do something like that with is his name Aragon? Is that the guy's name from Lord of the Rings?
Aragon? Yeah, like Viggo Mortensen's character.
Big sword instead of a big axe. Happy days. Have him running around chopping orcs. Like,
yeah.
Game made. Hire me, Embracer Group. I've got it sorted.
The funny thing is, like, that probably does sell, but if you'd ask me, like, from like a neutral perspective, what is the single biggest determining factor of whether or not a game like that goes on to be successful? Again, it's not Lord of the Rings. It's not even necessarily the genre or the fact that you're making a God of War ripoff. Is it good? If you create a third-person action-adventure Lord of the Rings game that gets 92 on Metacritic, I think you would sell millions of copies of that game. Like, I genuinely think that for as much as, like, there are notable examples, I think one of the things that is weirdly consistent in gaming nowadays is when it comes to, and it's a very difficult field to get into, I understand, but when it comes to big budget, AAA releases, if you get to the point where you're making what is received as or acclaimed as one of the best games of the year, if you get into the high 80s, low 90s on Metacritic, I think your game will sell. I don't think there are many examples of AAA games that reach that level of acclaim and flop. There are some, and it's disappointing.
Shall I tell you one?
Yeah.
Embracer Group own the IP for Guardians of the frigging Galaxy, the video game.
Oh yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy was a pretty
80 to 90, well accepted by critics, but because of what happened with Marvel Avengers, it did financially.
You wonder if the IP there maybe hurt it a little bit. I'm also just looking through I can't find many kind of concise or cohesive lists of everything that Embracer technically own, but I'm trying to look through stuff to see like what they could bring back. I don't know if you would fancy being creative director and if any of these, Jonesy, let me know if anything stands out. But you could bring back Legacy of Kain. People are thirsty for that. Thief, Gex.
Thief was good. I liked Thief, but again, like, that's not going to make any money. Make the best Thief game you can. It's not going to do anything.
How has no one just made like an article of like, hey, here's every IP that Embracer Group owns?
It's one thing that I would love to know, and maybe this is just me being completely out of the loop. The Lord of the Rings film series, that was the big boy of like Lord of the Rings, right? That's what pushed the video game sales at the time. That's what made Gollum famous. That's what did a lot of the heavy lifting. Yeah, those films finished coming out 20 years ago.
Yes.
So you're actually like, now you're talking about quite a dated IP. I understand that you had the Hobbit series after that, and you had some other stuff come out, and you've obviously like got the Amazon series. But I'm kind of thinking like Lord of the Rings is pretty old hat now. And before you can start talking like Star Wars, before Star Wars games sort of got good again, you had a whole new trilogy of movies, and a whole new, like, Disney brought all of those things to TV series to TV and made it really good again. To say we own Lord of the Rings, man, it's like, yeah, but you need some good Lord of the Rings movies or series or something to levitate it, to get it back up to where you need it to be in order for the games to have an audience to hit with. And I think at the moment, like, that audience doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. And like, even if there's like, sometimes there's a sleeping audience, an audience in waiting. Like, you just reminded me there of something like The Matrix, for example, which again, like the Matrix, I think peaked some time ago. And even then, like, there were like real big problems in at least 2/3 or maybe like half of the core trilogy of Matrix films. If like someone came to me now as like, I'm thinking of investing hard in the Matrix as a brand or as an IP and like rolling it out to make new Matrix video games, I would sit there and say, you can't put the Matrix on the box and have it sell. I think there are a lot of, as I said, Matrix fans in waiting, like a lot of people who are interested enough in that world or that IP that the right things could bring. But like with Star Wars, you got to have a consistency, and you've got to build things back up to the point where it's going to be, as big as it can be, and then you've got to keep a level of consistency, which I think Star Wars also didn't. Which then saw Star Wars, I think, kind of peak, at least as far as the feature films are concerned, peak slightly early, then tail back off. But we are clearly still dealing with a post Star Wars comeback environment where Star Wars video games like Outlaws announced last week can still generate a lot of excitement.
It's also, I think you nailed it by saying if you can make a game, a Lord of the Rings game which makes you money has to be a 90 on Metacritic or something like that.
It's a good start.
And if you have the ability to make that game anyway, let's say it wasn't Lord of the Rings, let's say it was just in a medieval universe with orcs and dragons and whatever. If you could already make that video game, then even if you didn't make it Lord of the Rings, you're still going to have a very successful video game. And Embracer Group have got plenty of developers under them who could make that sort of game. Like the fact that you own Lord of the Rings might give you a higher bump, might make you more money because, like you said, a sleeping audience, Lord of the Rings fans. But it's not going to make your game be good when your game is shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Which people get that does my head in. The idea that you can just slap on an IP and go now, like Gollum. I mean, it's exactly what happened with Gollum. It seems we can just slap Gollum onto a mediocre game and then it will do well. And no, it won't.
Yeah, exactly. One kind of thing to note on that front before we move on is a bit of positive news from Bracer. Lars said, quote, "Our financial year started with one of our greatest successes so far, Dead Island 2, which exceeded our management's already high expectations. If Dead Island 2 came out and was in the same state as and was thus received the same way as that Saints Row reboot, Dead Island 2 doesn't sell nearly the amount of copies it does and doesn't become, as he described it, one of their greatest successes thus far. Dead Island 2 was massively helped by, even though it wasn't overwhelming critical acclaim, it was positive. It was a
noise. And it was a good game. Like it was
great word of mouth and that great story of like, oh, Dead Island 2 is real. It came out. It's a product, and actually it works, and it's fun. That did so much heavy lifting for that game.
That's so true. I hadn't even thought of that. There was almost a lore attached to Dead Island 2, which most games don't have. So that game was always going to get a lot of publicity that beyond what it would have deserved had it not been Dead Island 2. If it was just called Zombie Apocalypse, they would have to. You don't get the publicity that Dead Island 2 got.
Yeah, but again, the publicity got people in the door. The quality of the product was what got them to stay and talk about it and regurgitate that lore. And that's what saw the supposed sales. And that's what was missing in Saints Row. And that's what I think is another stark reminder of, yes, while it might be a little bit sort of, it's maybe slightly silly of me to nonchalantly talk about how developers should just make a 90 plus rated game on Metacritic. I understand that that's not how it works. But again, I think it's another reminder that even when you're talking about the 70s and 80s, there's a positive correlation between how good your game is and how positive the word of mouth is and how likely you are to create a success out of it, whether you've got a known brand attached or not. Just try and make good shit, I guess, in all walks of life, Jonesy.
No, absolutely. I think it's slightly more complicated because I imagine if you're like CEO of a company like Embracer Group and you see a game like Hogwarts Legacy, which is not a great, it's not a perfect game, it's not a fantastic game, but does well and is well received and makes a lot of money, you're kind of like, well, hold on, that's Harry Potter, that's Hogwarts. We've got Lord of the Rings. They're similar size franchises. We should be able to make the kind of money. I think the difference with something like Legacy was it was almost the opposite in that people were like, holy shit, they actually made a good Hogwarts game. We weren't anticipating that. The problem that Lord of the Rings has got is they already have quite a few Lord of the Rings games in existence. This wasn't and the Hogwarts was is the first Harry Potter game. This would be like, I don't know, like the 6th or maybe, or like the 5th. I've got no idea. I'm trying to think now. You've got all the Lord of the Rings trilogies. You then had Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, Gollum. You've got the Gimli game. So I'm already at 7.
There was the Third Army or something like that. There was a turn-based RPG that came out not long after the trilogy games. There was the Third Age.
Right.
And then there was another one that was like an action game where you played as 3 characters at once. There was also a Hobbit game.
Oh, right. So you're not
like an old Hobbit game, pre-movies Hobbit game.
So you don't even have the luxury of saying, hey, you loved the movies, or you love the books, you love the movies, now play the game. It's like, you love the world, you love the movies, now play the 20th game in the franchise. This one might be good. It's much more cross-play.
Honestly, do you know, like one of the... I wish we could play out hypotheticals like this in some big, super advanced like AI-powered machine that tells us what would happen. But I think one of the most successful strategies that Embracer could use for at least the beginnings of their re-emerging the audience for Lord of the Rings games in Lord of the Rings games would be remastering or remaking the Lord of the Rings Return of the King. And I'm sure that would be an absolute shit show in terms of licenses and so on, and deals they'd have to cut with movie studios. But I reckon if you do that and you do it right, I reckon that sells a few mil.
That would make more sense.
And you've whetted appetites. And it's like, oh, Lord of the Rings game. Actually, maybe I do want to play a third-person action-adventure game where Gandalf shoots magic at people.
But then can they do that from starting with the Return of the King? Like, do they not need to go in? Do they not need to do the old Resident Evil thing of go, here's the first Lord of the Rings, because Return of the King's the second one, is that right?
Yeah, but the problem, Return of the King's the third one, but the problem is the games, the licensed games based on the Lord of the Rings trilogy were all quite surprisingly different to each other.
I think I only played one of them, I think.
Yeah, Two Towers and Return of the King were fairly similar, but Return of the King was the one where they kind of like had streamlined it down to this, like just a solid to movie tie-in third-person action game where you bounce between. Like, there were sequences where you played as Gandalf and Aragorn and stuff like that, but there were also some, like, weird side sequences where you played as Frodo and Sam and with, like, Shelob or whatever that big spider was called. And, you know, it had a lot of the things that kind of movie tie-ins at the time had with kind of, like, his opportunities to see maybe what was happening, like, when during this scene in the movie, here's what these people were doing, or here's some behind-the-scenes featurettes and stuff like that. Hence the Matrix did a lot of that shit as well, because obviously the Wachowskis were heavily involved in the production of that game. That's a big conversation, and I feel like we spun that out in more directions than I thought we would. But that's because it's big and it's complicated, and it's going to be fascinating to see what Embracer do next. Finally, though, Jonesy, before we sign off, there's one quick thing I wanted to bring up, if for no other reason than just to get your kind of like your gut reactions to some interesting headlines that have been coming out of the world of streaming lately, which we are tangentially related to. We do stream occasionally, albeit on YouTube, which is not the platform that we'll be discussing today, although each of us have streamed on Twitch in the past. And so we are perhaps familiar with what streaming on Twitch entails. We're familiar with, if not the partner program, then the affiliate program, if nothing else. But it's the partner program that has been making a few headlines in the past week because Twitch have introduced what they are describing as a new revenue split for partners. But there is, of course, a catch that we'll get to in a moment. It's called Partner Plus, and it's a benefit for existing partners, offering a 70%, or so a 70-30 revenue split on subscriptions, which is kind of a return to what some streamers, certainly bigger streamers, were already on at one point prior to Twitch sort of canning it a little while ago. However, there are, of course, caveats to how this works. As I said, this is kind of aimed at people who are maybe a little bit further along in their journey as a partner as we ever were in our streaming adventures. For example, you need to maintain a subscription count of at least 350 recurring paid subscriptions for 3 consecutive months. People have been quick to point out that this means that gifted subscriptions and Prime subscriptions, which are, of course, very popular and very prominent, wouldn't count towards this number. And so what that means is that the response to this from the majority of streamers, and again, when you talk about Twitch, you're talking about the majority of streamers being in, let's be honest, as you and I were, the kind of the lower end of earners on Twitch.
Well,
There's that disturbing fact, isn't there, though, that like to earn minimum wage on Twitch, you have to be in like the top 0.1% of streamers on the platform, right?
So I actually pulled out some information because I was there was a leak back in the day, and I think there's some other information as well that's come out about Twitch, and I was just trying to figure out how much you would need to be. So a poll of Twitch streamers seems to suggest that to be on to what we said, you said minimum wage.
Yeah, so, I don't remember. I just remember like a kind of a catchy headline that said something along those terms. I can't remember the numbers though.
So I think if you said that you could earn, what should we put it? So if you wanted to be someone who earned at least $100 a month on Twitch,
$100, so $1,200 a year, so nothing,
so barely anything. You would need to be in like the top 10% of streamers to earn more than that.
Yeah. That makes sense.
But then I think they've actually got some numbers on the site that I found that does drill down a little bit to says effectively that in order to earn $1,000 a month, you would need to be in the top 10,000 streamers, which suggests that the number of people actually streaming on Twitch is gargantuan.
I mean, I think it is.
Which is a lot more than I ever thought that there were, to be honest.
Well, I think that's the kind of the mistake that I think some people make, is that they still see live streaming as a sort of a fledgling, like an up and coming thing to try, and that Twitch are like relatively new sites. But I think the number of people that have created a Twitch account and tried their hand at streaming at one point or another, just to realize, oh, I'm sat here with 0 viewers and there's nothing I can do about it, or at least I'm going to have to try very hard and scream from the rooftops to change something about that, and then give up. That's an extremely big number. And it's the people, though, that haven't given up that are looking at this and saying, well, this is a lot of hot air. The number of people that are actually going to experience or benefit from this new 70-30 split that Twitch are talking about a lot is relatively slim. You're talking about a portion of streamers who are A, partnered, B, earn over 350 subscriptions within that time period, but also don't take more than 2,400 because then they'll hit that $100,000 threshold across 12 months. So this is really like looking at the weird middle ground of people who aren't making sort of like it's an odd spot, which I guess is kind of enough ammunition for people on Twitter who fall under these thresholds to say, well, like, this isn't a thing. This isn't benefiting most people. This isn't benefiting streamers. Why not make this for all partners, and so on and so forth? Which is a little bit. I don't want to. I feel like I'm not going to say it. It just might, because it could be misconstrued as mean. But yeah,
it is a weird one. Like it is very strange because like if the 50-50 seems ridiculous for what. Like if someone's signing up to do your partner thing and they've got. What do we say? 350 paid subscriptions, and they're currently getting 50-50. Like that does seem ridiculous. But then the fact that this is such a small group of people, this is going to affect before you then get over to the 100,000, which is such a that's the very top level of streamers anyway. And then so if you're talking about those people that are that successful and that they draw in that much of an audience, surely you're just effectively saying to them, "Hey, man, you should go to sort of another platform because we don't really want you." Like, it's such a strange way to do it.
Yeah. I guess the question is like, because of like Twitch's size and potential discoverability issues, do they actually end up making more money on another platform? But it's interesting that you mentioned other platforms, because this is a conversation that continues to rumble on in the background and has come to the forefront once again this week, kind of timed quite interestingly with Twitch's announcement, because Kick, which is, I guess, it's being touted as sort of like an up-and-coming streaming platform. I think it's got a lot of problems, such as some of the creators that have gone over there are people who are perhaps known to have slightly dicier, less Twitch-friendly backgrounds. And I think also Kick themselves have connections to like crypto gambling websites in the past, like Stake, who of course made a big splash on Twitch before Twitch amended their terms of service to essentially make platforms like that not banned, but you couldn't stream yourself gambling on platforms like Stake after a certain point. But Kick made headlines this week when XQC, real name Felix Lengyel, which I'm probably butchering, but after Lars Wingefors, I think I'll probably get away with it. He was one of the largest, if not the largest streamer on Twitch, certainly as far as the English language goes. He has announced that he has signed with rival platform Kick, in what's being touted as certainly one of the largest streaming deals ever. I think some people were saying that even if you applied it to the world of professional sports by some metrics, it would be one of the biggest contracts ever signed. Brokered by Ryan Morrison, who's the CEO of Evolved Talent Agency. It is a 2-year non-exclusive contract that is worth 9 figures. A lot of people talking about $100 million, so $50 million a year. Interesting as well to say again, non-exclusive. So this doesn't even mean that XQC has to stop streaming on Twitch entirely. The exact amount of the deal hasn't been revealed, but it's massive. And it's reminiscent. Yeah.
Well, the non-exclusive thing to me is weird. Like, how's that work? If he does that multi-streaming to Kick and to Twitch at the same time,
I don't know if Twitch allow that though. I'd imagine there's going to be some kind of contract where he has like a minimum number of streams or minimum number of hours he has to stream over on Kick, and he like added a clause where he doesn't have to give up on Twitch entirely. But it will be interesting to see, how that balances out. I don't know.
If you were smart. And if Twitch was smart, they would immediately turn around to XQC and say, don't worry about it, multi-stream.
I mean, yeah.
Because then they could then scupper what Kick are trying to do by, signing a non-exclusive deal and saying, right, yeah, don't worry, man, you can still stream with us. It's only 2 years. And then after 2 years, see how you feel. Maybe you want to stay there. Maybe you want to come back here. Because then all those people that are already on Twitch who don't want to have to move over, they're still pumping their subscriptions into XQC there. They might lose some people because of Kick. Yeah. The worst thing they can do is to go, no, you can't multi-stream, therefore you can't put your stuff on Twitch because you're going into Kick. You're playing right into their hands. Like, if anything, you should just, allow them to do it. Just say, yeah. And if a small person says they're going to do it, just be like, no, you can't do it. You don't earn any money. You don't care.
I don't know if Twitch have a great track record when it comes to making decisions that are in their own best interests.
Terrible track record.
Yeah,
I would go so far as to say they often do the opposite to what you think they should do in their business decisions.
Yeah, but between these two bits of these two interesting revelations this past week, it's going to be interesting to see, because there is a kind of an arrogance, I guess, sometimes to Twitch, is what you could say, is they're the really big bollocks of the live streaming industry. Amazon owned, they're the number one destination for streamers and viewers alike, and they are still the home of the biggest streamers on the planet. And when even massive companies like Microsoft have gone after some of that audience, you might remember, folks at home might remember Mixer, which was Microsoft's streaming platform. They went after the likes of Ninja and Shroud and bought them up on what were exclusive deals, and much smaller than the XQC one. I think Ninja was estimated to have a contract worth 20 to 30 million. And Microsoft in the end were like, yeah, we're out. Those contracts are null and void, and we're closing down Mixer. And so you do kind of wonder, like, how much longer can whoever it is that's behind Kick continue to throw around these ludicrous sums of money for these very generous and lenient non-exclusive contracts? It's weird.
Does it remind you a little bit of a rival to YouTube many years ago that tried to?
What was it called?
I can't remember.
But oh man. Well, yeah, they paid you to upload. They paid you for it wasn't just the ad revenue that you'd earned, right? You'd earn guaranteed amounts based on your uploads.
And it was 48. They wanted a 48-hour exclusivity in front of YouTube. So we uploaded our content to YouTube to their first 40 hours. You put it on YouTube, and they were paying silly amount of money in order to get that exclusivity. I think trying to poach the YouTube audience, and they were dead inside of 6 months, I think.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. And to be fair, you mentioned that, like, I think Kick have some other like things like that as well. Like, I was reading the other day that I think Kick are offering some mid-size streamers, basically a salary, saying like, hey, we'll pay you like $30,000 a year to stream on Kick as you kind of grow your audience, which is another like not as expensive as a $100 million deal, don't get me wrong, but it's an interesting kind of tactic to lure, assuming the viewership goes to Kick and people can grow audiences on Kick that are sustained through subscriptions that can rival the amount of money one could earn on Twitch, that's going to be what's interesting to see. Because of course, like we talk about Shroud and Ninja when they went to Mixer briefly, or you talk about I don't know, there have been people in the past that have briefly gone to Facebook or briefly gone to YouTube. The thing that most of them have in common is once those contracts are over or voided, is they come back to Twitch, because it's still so much harder to make an equivalent amount of money on other platforms. And YouTube have continued like a push, and YouTube, you know, went out and got Ludwig, and they went out and got Valkyrie and people like that. But I haven't heard about even Tinder Tapman, like was in the more sort of like, boots on the like, beer drinking, sports loving, the shooter playing, audience. Like that was a big deal. I remember thinking, and like I haven't really heard much about YouTube's live streaming fortunes, for better or for worse, since those kind of deals. So it's just a weird landscape at the moment, one where I don't know. I'm just waiting for someone to sign a contract under our noses, Jonesy. That's all I want out of this.
Do you know what I always think is funny about these sorts of things? Like you were saying there about kind of paying streamers salaries. If I had Kick's money, like startup money, and I had 9 figures to drop on someone like XQC, I wouldn't touch someone like XQC. Do you know what I would do? I would take that 9 figures. I would say, all right, I'm going to go to universities across the world. I'm going to find hot, nerdy girls and guys, and I'm going to pay them, or like I'm going to go and find nerdy courses that they probably would have come through because they like video games, and I'm going to offer each one straight out of university. I don't know what it will be like in other countries, but if you went up to a university graduate and said, I'm going to give you $25,000 a year to sit in your room and to play video games at 21 years old, whatever you are when you graduate university, and you could hire like 100 of them for the same money they've paid for, on XQC, and then just have like this.
But that wouldn't do anything.
I think it would. I think if you had,
because like you've still got a platform that no viewer is actively going to because their favorite streamers exist somewhere else.
But I'm saying
that's the problem. That's the problem with the live streaming scene, is that like 99% of the audience watch like 0.1% of the streamers.
Yes, I think you could build a new platform that would cost you. Like because that's what Kick have done, right? They've built a new platform. They're like, we're going to bring across XQC to bring across all the viewers. But I think that is not the problem that's not the thing you have. The viewers are on Twitch. They often think they can migrate the viewers, but I don't think that's anywhere near as easy as they.
I think that's what Mixer found out with the Shroud and Ninja.
So I wouldn't even bother. That's what I'm saying. If you had that much money to drop on one person, that means you've got a lot more money to run the company. I would try and create a brand new platform, and my platform would be, we've got the hottest streamers in the world. Nothing dodgy. I'm not saying they do anything weird. I'm just saying and that's your marketing. You say, we've got the hottest streamers on the planet from all over the world, and you click on a country.
I don't think that works. Again, when you look at like the top watched streamers on Twitch now as a platform, like you're reminded that the booby streamer thing is a fallacy, that a very small portion of people watch that to because they get off on it in some way, or they have some weird they think they have some weird kind of like fucking parasocial relationship with the streamer. But like Pokimane and Amaranth are regularly like the only 2 women amongst the 50 most watched streamers on Twitch and stuff like that, without live that come in and out, depending on things like the hot tub meta and other crazes that kind of kick off and launch some streamers' careers. Until they realize there's more money in OnlyFans and
Well, see, you say that, mate. Just don't you worry. When I've started my own streaming platform and we've got all the hotties streaming games, you'll be asking to come and work as my VP of. I don't even know what job roles you have.
I'll be there as long as I'm not going to get in trouble with your weird sort of like
VP of marketing, VP of new streamer hires.
Maybe I'll be down. I'd be fascinated to see what your company, the kind of dent your company's able to make, Jonesy, as I am with just about all of these purported Twitch rivals. Because
if you had to guess, if you had to take a punt, where the Twitch killer comes from, do you have a thought for the future?
It's just so hard to know, because like we've seen other established social media websites that aren't going anywhere, like Facebook and YouTube, try and sort of like move in that direction. Hasn't really had an impact. We've seen companies that don't have a presence in that field try and create one, like Microsoft, multi-billion-dollar organization. Now, don't get me wrong, the Microsofts and Googles of the world are very prone to giving up early on something that doesn't seem to be immediately successful. But I think even still, the Mixer experiment failed by and large. And now we've got the other weird thing, which is like weird startups with connections to crypto gambling websites that have like money that seems to be growing on trees, spending, sports like LeBron James money on weird Canadian streamers. And like there have been so many different tactics that have been used and none of them have worked so far. And this all coinciding with us being told every 6 months by streamers, Twitch is the worst platform in the world, Twitch is imploding, Twitch is making the worst possible decisions. And no matter how much bad press Twitch gets, and no matter how many money moves or mogul moves, I guess would be the appropriate way of putting it, other platforms seem to make, the balance of power never truly shifts. And for that reason, I just feel like I have to sit on the fence and say, I don't know. Like, it's so hard to say, because all the ingredients for something to disrupt the balance of power have been there already, and it hasn't happened yet.
So I think you're absolutely right, but I think it's interesting when you frame it like that, and then you say a lot of streamers are annoyed about the fact of this split. The fact that it reverts to 50-50, and the fact that it's that they think it should be more of a 70-30 split across the board. But actually, if you think about it like that, and you say, hold on, the only reason you can make any, like, forget percentages, the only reason you can make any money is because there is an audience on Twitch. So you are, by coming over to our platform and by getting some viewers and getting 350 or however many paid subscribers, all you've really done is walked into our house and chatted to some of our guests, and they've agreed to like give you some money. So really, but actually, we're allowing you in our house. We're allowing you to stream here. So if you want to take 70% of our revenue, you can do one. Yeah.
We have the audience, we have the traffic, we have the millions of people who the first thing they do when they finish work is they go into their the address bar in their browser and start typing TW, or in most cases actually PORNHU, but then after that, TWIT, and so on and so forth. And also, we are Amazon, and we have the capacity to go out and find the most relevant on the heart, or perhaps I don't even know. I'm not going to say the highest paying advertiser in the world, because they're not, because Amazon have rules about who can or cannot advertise on content that they're technically representing. But like, there's a lot. You're right. There's a lot of sway there, and that's always going to be where the audience is. And it's so hard to know, because you just, in your business plan, you just implied that you don't think the larger streamers are the ones that are going to shift the audience.
No,
like you think you have to create a new audience, and like, so even that is like, that's a whole nother kettle of fish.
I think that's the only way Twitch ends up. Like the Twitch killer for me, there's no such thing as the Twitch killer. What it actually is natural decline of Twitch over time, due to the fact that it starts to, in 10 years time, I don't know, it starts to just feel a little bit old, a little bit dated. The changes they've implemented don't make the platform work that well. And actually there's a couple of rivals on the scene that work a bit better. They fit the meta a little bit better. The young people like it more for whatever reason. And then gradually the audience migrates. And at that point, one platform says, we do 70-30, and Twitch says, we do 50-50. And actually there's a realistic decision. Because at the moment, there's no decision, right? At the moment, the decision is 70-30 is great, but 70-30, if I get 70% of nothing, that's nothing. If I get 50% of 100 quid, hey, that's $50. Sure. So I think that's the thing people have to work out in their heads at the moment.
When does the Twitch killer rhetoric end? Because we've already we've already discussed someone who thought they could be the YouTube killer and how laughable that was with hindsight.
Right.
The conversation around the YouTube killer has ended. YouTube are YouTube, and it doesn't feel like anyone is ever going to take, like, there are going to be people that distract from YouTube. Like, there's going to be a huge wave of popularity in short form content. YouTube aren't going to be best positioned to take advantage of that wave of popularity. And so platforms like TikTok are going to come along and generate massive audiences over time. Still, people look at TikTok and YouTube and recognize that they're slightly different things, and that like TikTok aren't seen as a YouTube killer. And I think even if TikTok tried to expand and go into longer than short form content, they wouldn't be seen as like, what I'm saying is that conversation broadly died. Why won't that conversation die with Twitch? Is it because they're so inefficient and because they make mistakes and because their users are so unhappy, or is it just a matter of time?
I don't hear people griping about YouTube the way that people do about Twitch. I don't think there's no alternative at the moment for. I think the YouTube alternatives don't exist, like you just said, and so the big YouTubers don't seriously consider. Like, what is it, Rumble? Like, I've heard a lot of like
Rumble
right wing kind of stuff talk about
this thing. Yes.
Oh, I'm going there because I can say what I want. It's like, yeah, but no one else is going over there. Was it Donald Trump started his own Twitter, didn't he? Like, is it Truth Social? And no one went over there like for that. I think realistically, people want to be where the people are. And it's funny, you solidified it for me. I know exactly who the Twitch killer is going to be. I know exactly who the YouTube killer are going to be. I'll tell you. Do you know the Twitch killer is only going to be Twitch? And the YouTube killer is going to be YouTube. In the same way that MySpace like basically made themselves irrelevant with all the crap changes they implemented and by messing with what they had so much, and that people were like, God, this is an annoying platform. Like, God, I hate using this now. And then something else came along, like Facebook, and they went, oh my, just get me off MySpace. I think that's the only thing that would do it is
fair.
Those platforms themselves it will kill themselves.
Is it the only thing that's different between, like, we've got lots of examples of social media giants of the past dying and being replaced up until Facebook, although like I get like it feels like we've been in the Facebook, Twitter, Instagram era for a while, but that could change. I guess the thing that feels different about TikTok and Twitch and YouTube is that they're creator led and creator focused, and it feels like it's those creators that are subject to the same destructive cycle where they eventually fade away and become irrelevant and get replaced. But as long as they're replaced by something or someone on those same platforms, then the platforms themselves don't care, which makes it hard to know like what's the like how do you apply the MySpace analogy to Twitch when it's like it goes back to that argument that I think this whole thing is about, is like who holds the power. We all agree that Twitch is in a powerful position because it's the go-to place, but when you arrive at Twitch, you still need to watch someone.
Yes.
And yeah, that makes it really hard to quantify. I don't know. Sorry, that was a really unhelpful addendum in the end because I just trailed off in my own uncertainty.
No, I think it's really hard to know. Like you said, it's such a strange beast, and the way these things work is so. Because it made me think of Facebook, because like how you're saying, but we're in the Twitter, Instagram, Facebook era, and that's absolutely true. However, like Facebook is a little bit of a joke now when it goes. Like Facebook's for boomers. Like Facebook is,
but like I think what's happened is that the people who feel like Facebook is for boomers, rather than finding the new Facebook, they've adjusted to life without Facebook. They've said to themselves,
and Meta or Instagram.
I don't. Well, yeah, they've filtered that. So they say, okay, I don't need to upload a 200 photo album onto Facebook when I come back from holiday. I upload a story onto Instagram. I don't need to share my status with my grandma. I'll put out a tweet. Like, people have found other outlets for their social media habits without outright replacing Facebook, which is one of the interesting things that we've talked about loads of times over the years, is how many social media platforms come along and gain popularity by taking one facet of what a giant social media website or app did and just doing it kind of better. Like Instagram just did photos better. Twitter just did statuses better. TikTok and Vine are like Vine was always so fascinating to me, because it was like, you can share videos that are any length you want on Twitter or on Facebook. But an app that comes along and forces you to create a video that's a certain length becomes more appealing to people. I love the way that social media ebbs and flows, even if I always do so from a very safe distance. But it makes it hard to predict.
It is funny because like at the time it seemed weird, but actually like Facebook changing their name to Meta and becoming a parent company, and then sort of like withdrawing a little bit, is actually the smartest thing they could possibly have done, because then what happens is they sort of extend their tendrils into Instagram. They move between the two. And then as Facebook kind of starts to die off, as like we're saying, is like people joke that Facebook's for boomers. There's a shitload of boomers still out there. And when they say boomers, they don't just mean boomers, they mean boomers, Gen X, and like elder millennials. I still use Facebook. Like I don't put pictures and statuses on there, but I check it all the time because I know a lot of people that do use it. But even as those people like die off and start to like, not literally, but start to stop using the platform, it doesn't matter, because Meta just slide their way over it to Instagram. And then because they've got so much money, the next platform that pops up, they just buy that one and then they slide across to that one.
They have WhatsApp as well, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for them, it's like it actually becomes irrelevant as long as they can keep the momentum going of maneuvering from one social media platform to the other.
Very true. Yeah,
they probably don't give a shit that Facebook is
although
disappears.
They could maybe do with pouring a few less billions into the metaverse and into VR, and so at least while it's at the point where it's seemingly causing them to have to like Facebook. You have to also remember that Facebook have laid off tens of thousands of people in the last 6 months to a year.
Yeah. But that's a weird one because like we're talking about with games, everyone kind of knows, or they think they know where everything's going. It's going VR, it's going metaverse, it's going in this direction, but no one knows how it's going to get there. So all these people are trying to like get there first by investing a load of money, and it's kind of not working. And that's across video games, it's across social media. It's very interesting, like to see it happen in real time.
It absolutely is.
And to know that it's probably going to be something none of us expected. And the actual hub world game that everywhere wants to be, and the actual metaverse portal that everyone uses is going to be nothing to do with Facebook, nothing to do with Build a Rocket Boy. It's interesting, it's weird, but hey.
It is. It's interesting, it's weird. I mean, we're just, just regular, just innocent men, right?
Innocent men.
And for all your Twitches and your Kicks and your Facebooks and your Metas, Twitter, Instagram, we like to keep it simple. Just one link, patreon.com/SuperShow. That's where you can go when you are feeling sorry for us that we are not on $100 million 2-year non-exclusive contracts with Kick. You can help us feel that little bit better by pledging over there.
How did we turn this dry-ass week into a over 2-hour podcast by rabbiting on for so long?
I think you said it yourself, by rabbiting on. Like we have a unique capacity to spout uninteresting bullshit ad nauseum, and we'll continue to exercise our right to do so week in, week out, for as long as there's at least one person on planet Earth that finds it somewhat engaging or interesting. And my mum doesn't listen to this show, but I think I could convince her, which is basically our one-way ticket to never having to stop.
I like it.
All right. Well, Jonesy, as you said, a bunch of really uninteresting news stories that we managed to stretch out into not quite record time, but certainly longer than we thought when we started doing this thing. And so all the more reason for me to say thank you to you for being such a warm and generous co-host, and for offering, as always, such amazing insights into all these different stories, gaming and beyond. And thank you for always being such a treasure to, and whether it's in my life or the lives of anyone who watches and or listens to this podcast. Sorry, go for it.
Thank you, Jamie, for steering this rickety ship and keeping it afloat.
Oh, I hope it's not too rickety, but it is. You're right. Let's focus on the positives. We are afloat, and we're afloat because you are keeping us there. That's you who has watched or listened to this podcast, whether you're doing it live as it premiered on YouTube, I think it's going to premiere, or as it was uploaded to YouTube, or whether you're listening to this back in months or years' time, getting a heavy dose of nostalgia as we speculate about what's going to happen to Twitch when you're sat there in the year 2025 and you already know the future. Thank you, one and all, for joining us, for watching, for listening, for considering pledging to the Patreon. And we will be live again. Well, we're going to be back again with more regularly scheduled content, probably this time next week. Hopefully something interesting happens in the industry. But until then, from myself and from Mr. Jones, thank you and good night.
See ya.